And so we'll just get the live stream going in the next couple of minutes ago. So it's Thursday, April the 23rd, 9 o'clock. Usually the live streams run from about 9 o'clock through to about midnight. Sometimes a wee bit later. Depends on how many people want to stay up late to chat. Quite a few things for us to chat about today in preparation for the game against Falkirk on Saturday. Chance to reflect on Celtic's, in the end, 6-2 impressive win against St Mirren on Sunday, a game which Celtic started really, really well, and then second half were pretty pitiful, I thought, and then happily in extra time, in the first period especially, players like Nigrin, Maeda, Forrest, Iheanacho all got a good goal. So welcome to you, Paul McGregor. Lovely to have you on. Great to have you on as well, Rubber Duck 67. Some of the old faithfuls joining in, which is really good news. Good evening to you as well, Cheryl Gary 23. Hopefully, as you say, we'll have a nice, good chat. As I say, I'm all for sharing opinions. Everybody's right in my book. As long as people share their opinions in a pleasant, polite, respectful way, value everyone else's opinions, and where we agree, we agree, and where we disagree, we can disagree in a friendly, respectful fashion. Good evening to you as well, Dexter. R9B, sorry. Lovely to have you on. As I say, quite a few things for us to talk about this evening, as well as saying hello to everybody. We'll have a chance, hopefully, to have a wee look to see what we think about how Celtic should line up for the game against Falkirk on Saturday 7:30. So one thing I think we could have a wee chat about, certainly, over the first wee while, is who we think our starting 11 should be for the game against Falkirk on Saturday afternoon. It's a 5:30 kickoff at Celtic Park, so nice home game to start the last 5 games of the league season. The other benefit about Celtic playing at 5:30 on a Saturday evening is that Rangers play Sunday afternoon. I think it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, and then Hearts play Hibs in the Edinburgh Derby at Easter Road in Edinburgh. That game then follows on the Rangers match. So in theory, Celtic do have an advantage going first against what should be the weakest of the 6 teams in the top 6. Falkirk apparently also having a few injury problems. Haven't really looked into that in more depth. Dare say over the course of Friday, we should get further updates on all of Celtic's players. And a number of questions, and as Paul McGuire's putting forward, suggesting that we start Iheanacho and start Forrest. They certainly were difference makers in the extra time period against St Mirren. Iheanacho scored a couple of goals. Forrest created one, had a hand in two of the other goals. My big worry regarding Iheanacho and Forrest is, if we do start them, is just how many minutes we get out of them. Remembering also that Callum McGregor seems to be allowed to start every game, even though he's about half fit. McGregor certainly got taken off again around about the 70th minute mark. Got taken off at that stage in the St Mirren Cup match. He got taken off around that same level in the previous league match. So it does look like McGregor can't complete much more than 60 to 70 minutes. the question then also is how long Forrest and Iheanacho can play for. So far, particularly in the last month or so, Forrest's best performances have always come as a substitute. Iheanacho's had a couple of good performances as a substitute against Dundee and against St Mirren, obviously at the weekend. However, when Iheanacho last started, which was the Dundee United match, I thought he was pretty much pitiful and useless for the whole of the 60 minutes or so that he was on the pitch. So I think it swings and roundabouts. I think personally, because there are big question marks regards Iheanacho's fitness and Forrest's endurance to complete a game, whether it's best to keep them on the bench and do what we've been doing with them recently, which is bring them off the bench with 20, 30 minutes to go. But as Paul McGuire is saying, they definitely made a difference. Great to have you on, Gavi boy. Sorry to hear if Sligo boy is having some internet problems. Sligo boy usually one of the driving forces of all these Thursday evening chats. Good question, Rubber Duck 67. So that's one of the other conundrums for Martin O'Neill is who do we start at right back? The story is that both Callum Osmond and Alistair Johnston have come through bounce friendly, behind closed door friendly games last week and this week. They both played 30 to 45 minutes or so, appear to have been able to complete that time without any recurrence of their hamstring problems, able to play normally. I think Osmond also scored in one of the two bounce games, the one last week where he played 45 minutes and Johnson played 30. Apparently this week they had another one, not sure who that was against, but apparently both Johnson and Osmond came through well. Question then would be whether we start Ralston, who had, I thought, a really good game on Sunday against St Mirren, whether we start him, bring Johnston on for the last 20 minutes, or whether we start Johnston and have Ralston as the person to come on for the last half an hour. I think it swings and roundabouts personally, but I think Ralston, as I said, I thought Ralston played well on Sunday and maybe deserves to keep his place in the team. If there are some doubts regarding Alistair Johnston's fitness. In theory, the more difficult games are yet to come. Hibs, then Rangers, then Motherwell, then Hearts. So maybe if we give Osmond and Johnston an extra week to recover, extra week of training, an extra week of increasing the contact and so on, maybe that's the better option. Good evening to you, Chipper67. Hopefully going to be a nice evening as well. Good evening to you as well, Lauren. You'd start I'd start Ralston at right back. Confidence will be high after that cracker of a goal. There's no sense in throwing AJ in from the start. No need for it. So, in your opinion, I think it's one of these ones where Celtic actually are quite lucky in that we've got a very experienced right back in Alistair Johnston, a very experienced right back in Anthony Ralston. They're both internationals. Ralston's been through this stage of a season on multiple occasions. Not sure how many league titles Ralston's won in his time as a Celtic player, but he's been part of lots and lots of squads for Celtic over the last 10 years or so. So I dare say he's got quite a number of winners' medals, much like Forrest and McGregor and so on. So I think we actually have a dependable person at right back who's happy to be the backup, is good enough on his day to be a good right back, and as he showed on Sunday, able to get forward and create a goal, or as it was on Sunday, to score a goal. I thought he and Yang linked up really, really well to create that goal on Sunday. one of the problems that Gavi Boy was just making a comment about whether Johnston and Osmond played in the bounce game friendly. Is the two sources I read both suggested that they had played and that it had gone well. The source had also said that they'd played against Ayr United in a bounce game friendly behind closed doors the week before, and that had gone well. Johnson playing about half an hour and Osmond playing 45 minutes and scoring a goal. Yep. So so basically, Shadow X Gary 23. My understanding was that he played 30 minutes against Ayr last week in a bounce game. Osmond played 45 minutes, and they were doing the same again this week with an intention to have Johnston playing more this week than he had the week before. We'll find out, I dare say, tomorrow when we get training footage, and then hopefully we'll find out in Martin Neal's press conference in the afternoon. So, Chipper 67, agree with that comment. Saracchi should be starting, need to leave egos at the door and drop Tierney. Kieran Tierney this season has scored 5 goals from left back and made 11 assists from left back. He is one of Celtic's better goal scorers in the charts. We've got Nygren now on 20. We've got Yang. We've got 9 or 10. We've got Maeda on 8. We've got Hatate on 6. So Tierney is in our top 7 or 8 goal scorers. He's one of our best assist makers. I think Saracchi's best coming off the bench when there's more space and less need to defend. I'm not so convinced that Tierney's I'm not so convinced that Saracchi's a better defender than Tierney. I think Tierney's a better defender than Saracchi, and this season, as I say, Tierney has chipped in with 5 goals, which is as many as he'd scored in his whole Celtic career before this, and his 11 assists this season equals his best ever tally for assists in his previous Celtic career. So I would be inclined to So, Lauren, you're saying O'Neill won't rest Tierney. Can we really put Saracchi ahead of him? Yang on the right, Maeda through the middle. Saracchi won't do 90 minutes, so switch to Maeda on the left when an Iheanacho comes on. I think the good news is with Celtic having Engels back, with Osmond and AJ on the verge of coming back, with Oxlade-Chamberlain gaining fitness with every game, with Iheanacho gaining fitness with every game, with Forrest definitely being able to play a good 20, 30 minutes in the game. I think Saracchi's best coming off the bench as well. He has had a bit of doubts with his hamstring injuries twice this season. So yes, Chipper 67, that Lauren saying Saracchi playing one further forward is for a while. I think we easily could play Saracchi as a left-sided midfielder, even a Maeda style left winger, where he comes back to help in defence and in midfield a lot. Play Maeda through the middle. I think Maeda's best position personally is through the middle. Playing to the left rather than through the middle, because as we found out on Sunday, Maeda is not very good at holding the ball up, not very good at occupying big, strong centre backs to allow the midfield and the wide players to then come past them. Which is why I think we do need a player like, if we're going to play the way that O'Neill likes to play, we're going to need a taller, bigger player like Chavanchara or Iheanacho or Adamu as that central player for other people to play off of. We don't really play, in my view, to maximise Maeda's ability, which is getting in behind and over the top. which again would also be how we should play if we use Callum Osman in that central role. Yeah, Paul McGregor, quite right. So Saracchi has played a lot left-sided midfield in his previous careers in Uruguay and South American football. He is adept at left back. He's adept at left wing back, left inverted back, left midfield, and does have the skills to play as a left winger. So I personally would not be averse to having Saracchi coming on late in the game as a left winger or a left-sided midfielder. And quite often, actually, Saracchi's best contributions to Celtic have been much more further forward. I do think he's a bit dodgy in terms of defending. He's not got the same height that Tierney does. I'm not here to advocate for Chavan Chara. His goal output has been disappointing, but then if we actually analyse Iheanacho's goal output over the whole season, Iheanacho's goal output is much the same as Chavan Chara's, given the fact that Iheanacho's played a lot more games than Chavan Chara. I think Chavan Chara, as things stands, links up the play better. So I think actually Celtic play a bit better with him as the focal point centre forward than Iheanacho. That for me was shown at the Dundee United match, where Iheanacho was terrible in the first half, got taken off in the second half. I thought Chavan Chara, although he missed a couple of chances against Dundee, he actually got the midfield and the wide players interlinked better. However, swings and roundabouts. For me, the ideal situation would be play Iheanacho from the start now, hopefully get 60, 70 minutes out of him. Then the last 20 minutes we can use Osmond if he's fit enough, or use Maeda centrally. Rightio, Chipper 67's team for Saturday: Sinisalo, Raldo, I presume, Ralston, Arthur, Scales, Saracchi, Engels, Oxlade, Chamberlain, Negrin, Maeda, Iheanacho, and Forrest. Yang, Chinecki, Callum McGregor, Rio, the first subs. Well, it's an interesting one in that this season, Trusty's defensive ability has been way better than Arthur's, Murray's, and Scales. Trusty, for me, was Celtic's best defender alongside Ralston on Sunday. He's been Celtic's best defender. He was massive in the 0-0 draw with Rangers in the cup match. So I personally wouldn't be dropping Trusty. I think the other problem with Arthur and Scales as our two centre backs is our passing ability to get the ball out of defence would be almost non-existent. Much like the problems we had when on Sunday when Sinosal had no one to pass to, because Arthur wasn't making himself available for that pass from the by kicks and quick throwouts and stuff. However, and we're also dropping one of our top scorers and one of our top assisters in Kieran Tierney. We're also dropping our second top scorer in Yang. However, each to their own. I think definitely Chinecki is best coming off the bench. I think Callum McGregor definitely coming off the bench is a much better option for us. And I've been really, really surprised. Really, really surprised that Rio Tati has hardly played in the last few weeks. So I completely agree. It's for me, it's 6 of one and half dozen the other. I think if we need someone to defend, Trusty's a way better defender than Arthur. I think part of Trusty's difficulty with passing on Sunday was the fact that he wasn't getting the support from Scales that he usually does. He wasn't getting the support of McGregor in front of him. He wasn't getting the support to pass to Arthur. And so a lot of these links that had been created over the last couple of months between McGregor, Scales, Trusty, and Sinisalo and Tierney were all kind of mixed up because of the fact that we had Ralston at right back and we had Arthur at right centre back, and Scales and Trusty, who've kind of worked out a way to get the ball forward a bit better, were missing each other. I just think that for me, the number one role for a centre back should be defending, and I like Benjamin Arthur's height. I don't think he's got the same recovery pace. I don't think he's got the same experience or defensive intelligence that Trusty's got, and he also doesn't organise the defence like Trusty can do. And Scales is not a vocal centre back, and so Celtic lack an organising, noisy force in their back four if Trusty's not there, and Carter Vickers isn't there. Anyway, each to their own. Well, Kieran Allen, you're saying Chavan Chara wasn't on the bench because he hasn't played any part in the cup run so far. Well, it was him that put that penalty away at Ibrox to put Celtic through 4-2 on penalties. So, and it took a tremendous amount of guts to come up and take that penalty kick with all that pressure on him and a baying Rangers crowd behind him in his face and stuff. I thought Chavan Chara did a fine job to put that penalty in the net, and then in the game against Motherwell, he put the penalty in the net to give Celtic a 2-1 lead that became a 3-1 lead. I think Chavan Chara... anyway, we're not here to debate Chavan Chara. I think Chavan Chara is a decent player. I think he's lacking confidence, and I don't think he's been played so far by Celtic in his best role. He's been played as a more of a target man centre forward, which is not the way he's ever played before when he's been scoring lots and lots of goals in his home league in the Czech Republic. However, I don't think Chavan Chara is going to be in Celtic's lineup, nor Adamu's, for the rest of the season. I think it's going to be a mixture of Maeda, Iheanacho and Osmond as our central striker. Rightio, Paul Maguire's 11. Paul Maguire going for Sinisalo, Ralston, Trusty, Scales, Tierney, Callum McGregor, Engels, Nygren, Yang, Maeda, Iheanacho. I think that's a fine mixture of players. Personally, I would be a wee bit reluctant to start Callum McGregor simply because he doesn't seem to be able to play much past 60, 70 minutes. So his question is whether you keep him on the bench, play Engels or Hattati, Oxlade-Chamberlain, and then use McGregor for the last 20, 30 minutes just to sort of firm things up if Celtic do have a lead to hold on to, or if we are requiring to push forward, then McGregor can then go all out for 20 minutes. I think at the moment, because he's feeling his calf and Achilles, that he's not really going all out in a game when he starts the game. However, Paul Maguire, I think the 11 that you've chosen there is probably going to be the 11 that O'Neill goes with on Saturday. I think it's probably time to start Iheanacho, see how much time we can get out of Iheanacho in the game. For me, Trusty and Scales have formed a good partnership since Carter Vickers went out early in the season. And sometimes one player's performance might not be so good because they're having to change their role to compensate for somebody else not doing their job quite so well. So sometimes a defender might be a bit more exposed because his partner on the other side of the defence isn't covering back, or the left back's not covering in behind the left centre back, or the right back's not covering in behind the right centre back, and vice versa. So Great to have you on, Sligo Boy. Nice to have you on. Hail, hail to you and hail, hail to everybody. As always, Sligo Boy, a very popular person in the comment section. Chipper67, you're saying Yang is a diddy. James, he was brilliant extra time. Well, he's due a start. Well, he had when Forrest has started this season, his performances have been very, very poor. All his good performances this season have been coming off the bench the last 20 to 30 minutes. That's kind of also what Martin O'Neill was saying in his interviews, was the fact that Forrest, and he's got doubts about Forrest and Iheanacho's fitness to play a whole game. Because you can say, oh yes, we'll take them both off after 60 minutes. Well, if the backup player then gets injured, you're then running into more difficulties. Or if you have a couple of unexpected injuries, like Sinisalo gets injured and one of the centre backs gets injured, suddenly your plan to do 5 substitutions to rest McGregor, Forrest, Iheanacho, etc., are all up and gone down the Swanee, because you've already made 2 or 3 substitutions unexpectedly earlier in the game. Kieran Allen, Yang was unlucky not to score with his head. Yep, I think Yang gives Celtic on the right-hand side a lot more of an all-round game. He scored 10 goals this 9 or 10 goals this season. 9 goals this season. Forrest has scored 1 goal this season, which was against Aberdeen. So Yang's output in terms of goals has been far, far, far more than Forrest's. Forrest has had about 3 or 4 assists this season. So again, it's not massive it's low numbers of goals and not a tremendously high number of assists. And as I say, Forrest's starts this season have all been rather poor. So, Sligo Boy, you're watching the breaking news. I'm not sure what the breaking news is, because we've been doing the live stream. So, if you are able to update us as to what the breaking news is, that would be great. Okay, Chipper. Each to their own. I thought Forrest in the 30 minutes or so from when he came on in the second half to the end of 90 minutes. I didn't think he actually did very much in those 30 minutes. However, he very much came alive in extra time, and he was very, very important in extra time in driving Celtic forward. And I did think actually once McGregor went off, particularly in the extra time period, Celtic were far, far better getting the ball forward. The number of backward passes and sideward passes that McGregor made in the game in the 60, 70 minutes he was on the pitch, and somebody else who was watching the game, who's not a particular football fan, was talking about why was McGregor always facing his own goal? Why was he never facing forwards? Why was he always facing backwards to his own goal, or turning backwards to face back to his own defence rather than getting the ball out wide or through the middle, or swapping it from right to left? I didn't think McGregor was at all good on Sunday getting the ball forward, and quite often we lost a lot. I thought we lost a lot of our attacking impetus. Yep. So Paul McGregor, I do agree that some players do require to get a bit into the game. The problem would then be if the player does take 20 minutes to get into the game, but they aren't playing very well, you lose some of that impetus. I do think players like Saracchi and Forrest and Tierney are all better coming on against tired defences that have been running around for 60, 70 minutes. I think those players going up against fresh defences are not as good as they are when they're coming off the bench. So I'm just catching up with some of these comments, sorry. So everybody's got their own opinion as to the relative merits of Yang, who has, as I say, scored. He's now in second in Celtic's goal scoring charts this season. That surely to goodness must be worth something. Same way that Nygren's now scored 20 goals for us this season, and yet there are still Celtic fans, pundits, journalists who are saying that Nygren doesn't deserve his place in the side. If we hadn't got Nygren's 20 goals and Yang's 9 or 10 goals, goodness knows where we would be in the various different competitions. So I think it's actually a good thing that Celtic have signed James Forrest for another season. I think he's done enough this season to merit another year's contract. He will be 35 at the start of next season, so I fully expect this to be next season to be Forrest's last season. Hopefully we can add another couple of trophies to his 26 this season, add another 2 or 3 trophies to his tally for next season. And then which might make him the all-time forever, ever and ever Celtic trophy winner. So Kieran Allen thinking we should sign Stewart from Falkirk. I think that there is some merit in there. In that, my problem with all these players who kind of come out of nowhere and have had half a season of good top quality goals and stuff is whether that player can then step up to be a Celtic player, step up to play in Europe. I have my doubts as to whether Stewart has the ability to step up and be in the goldfish bowl and all the pressure of being Celtic's main striker. I think that's part of what's the issue with Johnny Kenny. Johnny Kenny under much less pressure in the Irish League, much less pressure in the English First Division, scoring plenty goals. I think the pressure of being Celtic's main striker got to him, and his performances for me went down and down and down. The more and more reliance Celtic had on him to be our main striker, the poorer and poorer his performances got. So I'm not convinced in the long run that that Johnny Kenny is the answer. I could be wrong with Barney Stewart of Falkirk. Could be one of these players who just blossoms and blossoms and blossoms and develops and develops and develops. Could be wrong. We've had some players who've come from lower league football in England, Gary Hooper being a good example, who scored an absolute ton of goals for Celtic. Lee Griffiths, Hibs, Wolves, back to Celtic. Lee Griffiths scored an absolute ton of goals for Celtic. So I really wish we had a player in our team who scored a lot of goals. Not convinced that Barney Stewart of Falkirk has done enough so far in his career to merit that. But Jimmy 67. So if we beat Falkirk and Hibs this week and next week, so we'll be in a good place. Then I think then you've got we would then have the pressure of Rangers playing against Hearts. The good thing is that if Celtic do win on Saturday, we'll be up into second place at the very least. We'd have to have a pretty big win over Falkirk to overhaul Hearts' goal difference. However, if we do beat Falkirk on Saturday, if Motherwell draw with Rangers, let's say, and then Hibs do beat Hearts, obviously our goal difference gets a couple of goals better, probably. The Hearts goal difference gets a goal or two worse. Suddenly it's extremely close at the top again. And I think then the Rangers Hearts game, which is on the Monday, the first Monday in May, bank holiday day, that starts to become a very, very big game. And obviously with Celtic having played before that against Hibs the prior day, that puts a lot more pressure on those two clubs as well. I do think Hibs will be up for the derby on Sunday. I think Motherwell will be up for the game against Rangers at Ibrox. Both those two are almost equal, fighting out for the fourth place in the Scottish League, which should get them into European games like next year. Yes, channel is Gary 23. Maeda did score his first goal on loan in German football. I think he had at Celtic a bit of difficulty settling down into the culture of Scotland. Then he's had a bit of difficulty settling down, having moved to Germany. He's managed to get himself from the squad onto the bench, and then from the bench into the team. And he did score his first goal for his German loan club. Whether that allows him to get a second chance at Celtic when the new manager comes in, whoever he's going to be, we'll find out. I haven't actually bothered to look up what the nature of his goal was when he was on loan, but so Paul McGregor, hopefully Motherwell and Hibs do us a favour. But you're 100% right. We have to take care of our own games. I think there's a strong theory if Celtic do win their last 5 league games, they will win the title. I know that the scenario would then be if Hearts have won all their games, it would then come down to goal difference. I do think Hearts are liable to drop a point or two here and there. I think the games they'll have against Motherwell, Hibs, Rangers are all going to be difficult games. I think the game against Hibs, obviously at Edinburgh Derby, quite a lot of animosity between the two sets of fans, the sets of players. They had quite a fiery, stormy game last time around. Hibs beat them 3-2 the last time at Easter Road. So I do think there's a lot more in that game than ordinarily. Plus, let's say there's the European place for them and for Motherwell to fight out for. Last time around, Motherwell drew with Rangers 1-1. Stephen Welsh scored a late goal, but then in that game also Motherwell played the last 20, 30 minutes with 10 men, but were still the better team than Rangers that evening. So I think Motherwell do have the capacity to do us a favour, but you're entirely right, Paul McGuire. We need to take care of our own games and then worry about everybody else after that. And I do personally think, it's just my personal opinion, we win 5 league games, we'll win the title. Simply because I think Rangers, well, obviously we win 5 games, we're beating Hearts and we're beating Rangers, and I do think Hearts and Rangers will drop a point or two here and there between now and the end of the season. So Pep Rex raising the point, what do you think of Forrest getting another year on his contract? I think Forrest is for me, and I know there's different opinions with other people. I think Forrest has shown himself this season to be happy to be a player who comes off the bench, happy to be a player that isn't starting games, happy to be the backup to Maeda, Yang, Tierney, etc. And I think now that he's kind of developed into that role, he's developed much better at coming off the bench and being an influence, as was the case against Rangers in the 2-2 draw, the 2-1 win over Aberdeen, and the Cup semi-final a couple of days, 3 or 4 days ago. So I think he has developed this role of being an impact sub, and being a bit quicker getting himself into the games. I don't personally think he's got the ability and the energy, the endurance, etc., to start a game and be able to give Celtic 90 minutes, which potentially he has to do because, as I say, you never quite know who you're going to have to take off for injuries or take off because they're playing so badly. So it's all well and good saying, well, we've got 5 subs, so we'll take off Forrest, we'll take off Iheanacho, we'll take off McGregor, we'll take off Tierney, and then suddenly you get 2 or 3 other injuries in the first half, and you're completely scuppered. So great to have you on, the Slabbering Cabbage. Sounds like a nice day at Loch Lomond for you. Great to have you on as well, Pat McLaughlin. So Chipper67 thinks that Motherwell are going to lie down. Motherwell didn't lie down in the game at Fir Park a few weeks ago. Motherwell fought very, very hard. So they conceded a goal very early to Rangers that evening, but they fought very, very, very hard, came back to draw 1-1 when they were down to 10 men. And most people who saw the game, the whole game, or watched the highlights felt that Motherwell were the better team for the last 60 to 70 minutes. And even with 10 men against 11, they were still the better side. So so Gabby Boy, I still think Hearts will finish third. I think that could be the case. The difficulty that Hearts have got is they've had a number of injuries and a number of suspensions this season. Now they have got Shanklin back in the side. However, they've got Devlin back in the side, but at the same time they've lost Leonard through suspension. They've been chopping and changing in their central defence and at their left back position through a lot of injuries and suspensions. They went away on a warm weather training thing to Spain whilst we were playing in the Cup semi-final, and they've come back with a couple more injuries. So McEntee and Magnuson are out for the rest of the season. I think personally that Shanklin's and Devlin are both liable if they play too much intense football over the next few weeks, that they could also run into injury problems as well. In essence, Shanklin had the same sort of injury that Iheanacho and Saracchi and Osmond and Johnson have all had. And all those sorts of injuries do tend to keep on coming back. So I can't. My personal prediction at this point would be Celtic to be top, Rangers to be second, and Hearts to be third. Because I do think Hearts are going to struggle in the games against Hibs, Motherwell, Rangers, and Celtic over the next 4 or 5 weeks or so. Just a wee second. So Pat McLaughlin, predictions are 3-0 to Celtic, 2-1 to Hibs, 4-1 to Rangers. I think 3-0 to Celtic, 2-1 to Hibs. I think those are both highly probable, highly likely results. I do fancy Hibs to at least draw with Hearts on Sunday. I would be a bit surprised if Rangers do beat Motherwell 4-1, simply because last time around, as I say, Rangers struggled to, after the first 10-15 minutes when they were the better side, they struggled to get themselves back into the game. And Motherwell got more and more of the ball, more and more control of the game. And even down to 10 men, they still were on top. However, the only way to find out what's going to happen on Sunday and Saturday is to have the games on Sunday and Saturday. I was watching another about the only other Celtic channel that I do watch on a regular basis is Celtic. So here's quite a few of you know also participate in their live streams, which is good because I'm all for sharing things around. Is that Quinny was trying to predict the results for the last 5 games of the season. And I do think the fact that Celtic, Rangers, Hearts are actually all quite inconsistent. You never quite know which Celtic team, Hearts team, Hibs team, Rangers team, Motherwell team is going to turn up on the day. That things are unpredictable. Rangers do seem these days able to score goals. I'm not convinced that Rangers have got a very strong defence. I don't think their centre-backs are particularly strong. I think their full-backs, now that Tavernier is retiring or being retired, I don't think their current full-backs at right-back and left-back are as good defenders as they need to be. They're much better going forward. And Rangers do actually have a number of players up front who can put the ball in the back of the net. However, I think defensively Rangers are dodgy. And Rangers also this season, not so much recently, have tended to draw games they maybe should have been winning. Okay, Paul McGuire's going for 2-0 Celtic, 2-2 Hearts and Hibs, and 2-1 to Sevco to Rangers. I think again, those are all perfectly plausible, probable results. As I say, I do fancy Hibs to get a point or more off of Hearts. I personally do think that Motherwell are more than good enough to get a draw at least at Ibrox. However, all it really takes is for 1 or 2 things to go in one team's favour or against. Remembering in the Falkirk Rangers match last weekend, or 2 weekends ago rather, Falkirk were 2-0 up. Going in towards half time, there was a questionable possible Dogso red card for a Rangers player. There was the highly contentious, was the ball out or in, that led to the Rangers' first goal that got just before half time. So football can be one of these games where just 1 or 2 things go your favour, 1 or 2 things go against you, and then quite often if things do start going in your favour, it's then taking advantage of those things. And that was kind of the case to an extent on Sunday for us when we got back to win 6-2 against St Mirren in the end, having, I thought, dominated them for about the first 30 minutes or so. Then we played pretty poor football for the second 45 minutes. And I thought we then played really, really good football for 15-20 minutes in extra time. And in the end deserved our game. So Kenneth Todd thinks that Sevco will win against Rangers. I think that's given the fact the game's at Tynecastle, probably I would favour that being a draw, but I can certainly see, depending on how Rangers come out defensively that game, depending on how the battle is in midfield, with people like Raskin and Diamande and so on up against the Hearts midfielders, it could be an interesting game. And I do fancy the pace of people like Braga and Kiziridis could actually be a bit of a difficulty for Rangers to defend against. But so Pat McLaughlin thinks the Monday night thing suits Hearts at Tynecastle. I think there's merit in that as well. It's a bank holiday Monday as well, so again, Hearts then should be able to get a nice bumper crowd, be live on television. I think there's a lot of things. The Tynecastle crowd is actually quite a partisan, hostile crowd. Not the easiest place to play football, as we found twice this season. some not nice comments about Quinn. I enjoy his style. I enjoy his delivery. Um, um, he seems more willing than other YouTube channel um, presenter, moderator people to hear other people's opinions. There were a couple of other ones I used to take part in as a participant in the live streams, and it felt as if no matter what I say, nobody's ever going to put my comment up on the screen. And it was all just his mates that got put up on the screen. So, whoever, each to their own. And it's nice, Chipper67, that for the most part, I speak to how you think as well, or if we do have different opinions, as is the case on several things, that we can at least to agree to disagree. Yep, YMCSC. That's a really good point, and I don't really understand what's going on. You say have O'Neill and Hatate fallen out? Surely he should be playing more. I really I don't understand why Luke McCowan gets first go at coming on to replace anybody in midfield. I think Hatate, admittedly, the first 2/3 of the season, Hatate was generally quite poor. I thought actually, as McGregor's fitness started to worsen and Engels was out, I thought that he actually did a really good job of controlling the midfield and leading the team to an extent in the games against Rangers, the 2-2, the 0-0, and the games around that time. I guess he and O'Neill must have fallen out, because I can't see any other possible reason why Hatate is beneath McCowan in terms of being the first sub on in midfield. I can see rationale as to why McGregor, Engels, and Oxlade-Chamberlain are all above Hatate at the moment. But I can't see any possible reason for McCowan to be seen as the better option off the bench for midfield than Hatate. Yep, Paul McGuire, I totally agree. I do think that winning the game against Falkirk does put Hibs, Hearts, and Rangers on quite a lot of pressure on Sunday afternoon. If we do beat Falkirk, we will at least be in second place going into Sunday. One or two results going in our favour, in that Hibs beat Hearts by a few goals. We beat Falkirk by a few goals. We could then overhaul Hearts' goal difference advantage and be level with them on points. If Motherwell were to get a point off draw with Rangers, suddenly we're top of the table, equal on goal difference with Hearts, and with the advantage of home games against Rangers and Hearts later in the last 4 games of the season. So Kenneth Todd's theory is, if Kelechi stays fit and firing for 50-60 minutes with Maeda and Yang running the defence ragged, putting balls in the box for the next few games, I think that's a definite good theory. We also hopefully should have Tierney and Saracchi bombing up one side as well from fullback, Ralston, Donovan, Johnson bombing up the other side from fullback. Hopefully we get Nygren into the box as well, so that we've got 4 or 5 players in and around the box. If McGregor gets his long distance shooting back the way it was at other parts this season and last season, again, I think that's also something we've been missing from recent games, is McGregor shooting from distance, because that was quite a powerful bonus for us last season. In particular, was McGregor got 10 goals for us last season. He's only scored 2 or 3 so far this season. So, kind of Todd is saying Hatate was benched so that he would fight for his place in the run-in. I think that's a possibility. That was certainly the reason that O'Neill said that Adamu got the place on the bench rather than Chavan Chara, was that Adamu had looked particularly good in training over the week. So maybe there's a question regarding Hatate's level of commitment in training, and that's why McCowan, who I'm sure is a massive trier, a massively Celtic committed player. Maybe that's what's separating McCowan from Hatate, is McCowan is trying harder, or appears to be trying harder in training than Hatate. Personally, I would go for the player with more talent and more ability to score a goal, create a goal, and battle in midfield. I'm not convinced that McCowan, as super duper backup Scottish player as he is, I'm not convinced that he is as good as Hatate in any of the key areas that we need him to be good as McCowan. So you're thinking with Hatate losing a tackle at Tannadice that led to the second goal, that O'Neill thinks he's not got the right mindset. Well, by contrast, I thought Hatate had a really good game in the second half against Rangers in the 2-2. He had all the guts in the world to come up and take that vital last-minute penalty against Rangers. Admittedly, it took him his third goal to get it in. I thought he then had a really good controlling game, replacing McGregor in the 0-0 Scottish Cup match. Again, tons of guts to come up in the penalty shootout and score a brilliant penalty. I think Hatate deserves to be first choice backup midfielder, be it coming on with Oxlade-Chamberlain, be it coming on with McGregor, be it coming on with Engels, whomever. But I think he should be several steps ahead of McCowan. Could well be. The other possibility is Hatate knows that he's leaving Celtic at the end of the season and doesn't want to get himself injured like he did at the end of last season, which jeopardised a potential move away from the club at the end of last season over the summer. So Wyman CSC, we only ran away with the game against St Mirren because they were knackered. I think that was part of it. You're quite right. In the second half, St Mirren committed themselves 100%. I don't think Celtic played at all well in the second 45 minutes, and may well be. And again, this is my theory regarding why players like Forrest, Iheanacho, Saracchi, Tierney are better coming on against tired defenders. Is I think they're better able to play into open spaces. That was a bit like the game against Dundee, where Saracchi set up the goal for Iheanacho. Is I think those players play better against tired players with more space to play in. So Kean Allen, football's easy, attack and try to score early has to be the objective. I do agree. We got off to obviously the dream start against St Mirren, a goal in 1 minute. We then had a good chance with Engels hitting the post in the 8th minute. We then had Yang in around about the half-hour mark hitting the bar with a great header. We then took 2-0 lead into half-time, and with Ralston's goal. So really, we did everything in the first half. I just thought in the second half, our midfield completely lost all their energy. And because Maeda's not very good at holding the ball up when he's playing as a central striker, Celtic had no outball, and St Mirren swapped their formation around. They got much more control of midfield. They got the ball out wide. They exploited a bit of lack of partnership between Trusty, Tierney and Arthur. Obviously, those three hadn't played an awful lot together in proper games. and that did allow, on a couple of occasions, man drawn their striker to get free. And my personal feeling is, if Celtic do give away goals, it's not just down to the goalie, it's not just down to the centre-backs, it's really down to the centre-backs, the goalkeeper, the midfield. It's also down to the wide players, the strikers as well, because in essence, football is very, very much a team game. So there is the possibility of individual flair and individual mistakes. But quite often with any goal, it's a mixture of one person's error leads to another person's error, which then leads to a good bit of play or whatever. So we think about the last goal that St Mirren scored. We had a throw in out on the left hand side. The ball got thrown into Iheanacho. His first touch was terrible. Maeda then was beaten by the St Mirren player. Our midfielders then didn't tackle back and track back and block. Ball got through to man drawn. Arthur was a wee bit slow getting himself going to mark him. Man drawn out muscled Arthur and then hit a really good shot. So in essence, it was a bit of an error by Iheanacho, a bit of an error by Maeda. Midfielders then not backing them up to block that ball coming forward, and then Arthur being a wee bit slow to react to the run by Mandron. So it's a combination of 3 or 4 people rather than one person, in my opinion. Are you, Ken? I would say, so the thing was, well, for me, Forrest came on in the 60th minute to replace Tierney, and then for those next 30 minutes, Forrest didn't really do anything much at all for those 30 minutes. However, when extra time started, he was like a different player, tons of energy. He drove Celtic forward. So once he got the armband, he was very much, I thought, he drove Celtic forward. And I thought he had a really good extra time period. So did Iheanacho. Maeda, as always, has tons of energy. Nigren got himself in the box a couple of times. Iheanacho did what Iheanacho's good at, which is putting the ball in the back of the net. I don't think Iheanacho gives very much more to the team at the moment in terms of being a target man, centre of the attack, which O'Neill wants him to be. But if we can get the ball into Iheanacho, he's showing that he's getting better and better at putting the ball in the back of the net with the more games that he's playing. Mr. Tomboy, that's a really good theory. O'Neill should send the team out on Saturday telling them it's extra time. Well, in essence, I think I very much get your point. I do think O'Neill should send them out with a message that we're going to go all out blitz attack. We're going to put Falkirk under lots and lots of pressure. We're going to try and get a nice early goal. We get a nice early goal. We add a second goal. We keep things at that point nice and tight in midfield. We push our defenders up to the halfway line. We keep Falkirk penned in their own half. We don't give them a chance to counter attack. That's kind of what we did actually against St Mirren. Is we went on the attack at the start of extra time, and basically St Mirren couldn't get the ball out of their half for the whole of that first 15 minutes of extra time because Celtic were doing so well pressurising the St Mirren midfield and defenders that they couldn't get the ball forward. So I think you very much are getting the right point of view, opinion, in that Celtic should approach it like, let's go all out to get the advantage and drive it home and put the other team under lots and lots of pressure. I think during the second half of the game against St Mirren, we let them put us under pressure, and then for the last 10, 15 minutes, it felt like Celtic were just playing for time and desperate to get those last minutes over. Chubba 67, I very much agree with what your point of view is there. We're poor, but O'Neill doesn't know his best team. for the last 4 months, always chopping and changing. Surely that has been an impact on players not knowing where they stand. I completely, totally agree. We've had more than our fair share of injuries this season. We've had obviously long-term injuries for Jota, long-term injury for Carter Vickers, who probably at the start of the season, most of us would have thought would be two of our most important players for the season. Unfortunately, Jota got injured at the end of last season. But I think a lot of us, when we were looking forward to the 25-26 season at the end of the 24-25 season before Jota got injured, I think people were looking for Carter Vickers to come back, having had his knee surgery in the summer, and be a new player for us. Jota then really to kick on. Unfortunately, got injured 2 or 3 games from the end of the season. So we've had a lot of players who we've missed through injury, Carter Vickers and Jota, pretty much the whole season. We've missed Johnson for pretty much the whole season. He played a few games, got injured, missed a few games, came back, got injured in his first game back, and he's been out since then. We had a lot of chopping and changing. We didn't seem really to know what our best 11 was under Rodgers. We had players like Negrin playing in several different positions, not really settling into any of them. We've had an unsettled situation at goalkeeper with Schmeichel's injury problems. We've had three different right backs on a regular basis. We've had Trusty coming in to partner Scales. I think that's actually gone well, but then Trusty got himself suspended after the Hearts game and suspended again after the Hibs game. We've seemed to me to have had a lot of injury concerns regarding McGregor. We've had also players like Iheanacho and Forrest and Saracchi and Tierney all struggling to play a full 90-minute game. So good news is we are getting more and more of our players back, it would appear, fit for these last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. So maybe having that continuity, maybe also having the fact that we've got some stronger players to come off the bench, etc. All of those things will give a bit of stability. But I completely, totally agree with you. Celtic has been unstable and fragmented and ever-changing on the pitch and off the pitch since pretty much the start of the season. It's been a very, very topsy-turvy, turmoiled season where there's been a lot of players coming and going and a lot of difficulties. So, George Hegarty 6486. Celtic fans should get Martin O'Neill back because only for Martin O'Neill, Celtic wouldn't be in the title race. Well, it's one of these conundrums. Is we don't know quite what would have happened had Rodgers stayed for the whole season. What position we would have been in had Rodgers stayed for the whole season. We don't really know what would have been the position had O'Neill stayed from October all the way through to May. What we do know is that Rodgers started the season for a couple of months. O'Neill came in for 6 weeks. Nancy was there for 6 games. And then O'Neill's been in since very early January. So those are things we know. We don't know quite what would have happened. Somebody was, one of the Daily Record people on their podcast thing was saying, if O'Neill had stayed as the manager from December through to January and carried on after that, Celtic would have won the title by now. Well, a lot of those things are up in the air because it's not as if when O'Neill has played against Hearts that we thumped Hearts, or when O'Neill's played against Rangers that we've thumped Rangers. We had a tight game against Motherwell. We lost to Dundee United, which is what happened to Wilfred Nancy against Dundee United. So all you really know is these are the results Celtic's had. Quite what Celtic would have done had we had the same manager all season and had Rodgers got the team blended into a team. Maybe Celtic would have run away with the title as they have in the past. Anyway. Sorry, lots and lots of comments going through. I'm sorry, I'm not been doing a very good job of catching up. So are you, Ken, saying, do you think we'll stick with Sinisalo for next season, or will we be looking for another keeper in the summer? I think the answer to that question is yes, we will be sticking to Sinisalo as our number one. And yes, we will be looking for another goalkeeper in the summer. So I think Ross Doohan is a good third choice goalkeeper at Celtic. I think he's happy to be the third choice keeper at Celtic. I don't think he's got any kind of visions of being the number one goalkeeper at Celtic. So I think Sinisalo deserves to start next season, assuming that he's fit, as our first choice goalkeeper. I think he's actually been a real breath of fresh air. He commands his box way better than Schmeichel does. His ability to clear high balls into the box, corners, throw-ins, throw-ins, etc., by punching the ball. He's much better at coming off his goal line into the defensive melee to catch the ball or punch the ball or clear the ball one way or another. I think his ability as a sweeper keeper is a bit better than Schmeichel's as well. I think his shot stopping this season has been better than Schmeichel. So I definitely would have Sinisalo as my number one goalkeeper for next season. But I do think we have to have as our backup goalkeeper someone as good as Sinisalo is now. I think Sinisalo at 24, 25 is going to get better and better and better. But I think we do need a goalkeeper who is as good as Sinisalo is currently to be his backup. Some talk about Callum Ward, the goalkeeper at Motherwell, being that player. I'm not sure about him. There are a few other candidates. One of the backup goalkeepers at Feyenoord apparently might be on Celtic's radar. So I think the answer to the question is yes. I think we'll go with Sinisalo next season, and yes, I think we'll get another goalkeeper in over the summer to be our second best goalkeeper or a 1B goalkeeper. So I have a 1A goalkeeper in Sinisalo and another player as the goalkeeper who's just as good as a starter, who can come in if there's any injuries, etc. Yes, I think the good thing now is that O'Neill does actually have a few different options for his front three. I think O'Neill usually likes to play with more of a target man centre forward. However, he went back to Maeda as the central striker. I don't think Maeda holds up the play very well, which is one thing. So we maybe shouldn't be playing our passes and crosses and so on to that sort of way of playing. I think we should try and use Maeda's ability to get in behind defences, over the top with balls over the top, etc. I don't think asking Maeda to hold the ball up and then bring the midfield in. Maybe we could use Nygren a bit for that. He's a bigger, stronger player than Maeda. But totally agree, Pat McLaughlin. Hopefully it's 4-0 and we're cruising, and we can take it nice and easy. So 667, do wingers ever do a lot throughout a game? It's usually small moments throughout the 90. That's why Jamesy for me should play. Yang scores every 12 games and offers little. Yang scored nine goals so far this season, which is the second most, which we've not played 108 games this season, so he's clearly scoring at more than one goal every 12 games. That may well be his over the whole of his career, but remembering over most of his career he's been coming on as a substitute rather than starting games. I think, to your other point, sometimes that's what wingers do. Whoever, with the way that Maeda plays as left winger, he is up and down the left wing. He's helping out in midfield. He's helping out at the left back zone. He's covering into the middle to close down defenders, close down goalkeepers, which is why I think he's better playing on the left wing rather than centrally, because he also is able to close down defenders and close down goalkeepers, even if he is playing as a wide player. He doesn't have to be a central striker to close down the goalie or close down the defenders to win the ball back or pressurize them into poor passes. And for me, Yang gives Celtic a lot more in terms of his ability to come back and help out in midfield, back and help in defence. And for me, he's a much bigger goal threat than James Forrest. Forrest has scored 1 goal this season. Yang has scored 9 goals this season. Now, admittedly, as you were saying earlier on, that comes down to the fact that Yang's had a lot more starts than Forrest. But each to their own. It really and it also depends on what the manager wants out of that player as well. Under Brendan Rodgers, he wanted his wingers not just to be players who got the ball forward, etc. He did want them to have the Maeda role of coming back to help out in midfield, which is part of the reason that Lewis Palmer wasn't very popular with Brendan Rodgers. He wasn't very good at tracking back. Forrest is pretty decent at tracking back, but not nearly as good as Maeda or as Yang. Tierney is not very good at tracking back. He's a bit of a liability if he ever is in the defensive third or in the midfield third. Anyway. Yep, Kieran Allen, I think you're bang on with that one. When we get the ball up the other end of the pitch and we then push up with our midfield and push up with our defenders, then form a barrier across the halfway line and keep the other opposition team penned in their own half, we are much more dominant. Now, we did that in large spells at the start of the game against St Mirren. We completely lost it from about 30 minutes to 90 minutes. We didn't do that at all. And from minute 91 to 110, we very much pushed St Mirren back and back and back. And then most of Celtic's best performances this season have been when we have got domination in midfield and then pushed the opposition further and further back and kept them pressed further and further back. So Pat McLaughlin saying it doesn't help when the defence are giving you hospital balls. I think that's partly true, but I think also for me it felt quite clear that Sinisalo, Trusty, Tierney, McGregor, Ralston were all a bit frustrated that other people weren't making runs for them. They weren't getting themselves into space. They weren't coming to get a pass. So I do think, like in everything in football, it's a team game. And sometimes one person's not doing their job impacts on somebody else not doing their job or making it harder for other people to do their job. But certainly in the game against St Mirren, our passing accuracy was very, very poor. It was down in the 70s when it ordinarily is high 80s or 90s. So I do think there's a mixture of all these things. So sometimes these hospital passes are not just the mistake of the defender or the midfielder. It's because other people aren't presenting or making the right run, or sometimes the two players aren't on the same page and don't know where to pass the ball to because they're not sure where Maeda is going to go or where Tierney is going to go, etc. Anyway, just be a wee second. Sorry, just getting rather warm in the room I'm doing the live stream from. Kieran Ireland, yep, I do like Arnie Engels, because he does, as you say, try to get the ball forward. I don't quite know why Callum McGregor seems to have lost that ability to think forward and get the ball forward. And I think certainly when the ball's at Hatate's feet or Oxlade-Chamberlain's or Engels' feet, Celtic are much better at getting the ball forward. And I think it was also something that James Forrest did a really good job with in the extra time period, was getting Celtic facing forward and going forward. Yep, so Wyoming CSC saying Forrest just doesn't have the fitness to beat fresh defenders from the start. Still a good option off the bench, though. I would tend to agree with that. And he beat Declan John, who is a sort of a hybrid left back, left midfield, left winger type person. Because St Mirren have changed their formation and gone from a back five to back four, it meant that Declan John was having to play much more as a proper left back. John had been up and down that wing non-stop for the whole game, and I think he had run himself out. So I do think part of the reason that Forrest did make that extra yard to get a super cross into Iheanacho is because Declan John was tired from having run about for the 90 minutes before, and also being a bit out of his current usual position as being more of a left back rather than a left midfield, left winger, like he often is for St Mirren. So I would tend to agree that I don't think Forrest has got the endurance, the energy to be able to play 90 minutes. And as much as we might say, well, we can take him off after 60 minutes, sometimes because of other injuries or other problems, or having to make other changes, you don't have the luxury of unlimited substitutions in football that you do in some other sports. So Wyoming CSC raises actually a point that I was talking with somebody else earlier today. O'Neill was talking about low energy levels after the St Mirren home game, the league game. Isn't that on him and the coaching staff? What are they doing in training? I do agree that I think in the Nancy years, the Nancy 6 weeks or whatever it was, 5-6 weeks, I think Celtic's energy levels and endurance levels were rather poor, which is why we tended to play one half of good football and one half of terrible football. You think about the Dundee United match, 1-0 about half-time. It could easily have been 4 or 5 had we put those chances away. Same as the Rangers game at the start of January. Again, we had 3 or 4 really good chances in that first half to be 3 or 4 up at half-time. Second half against Dundee United, that we lost 2-1. Second half of the Rangers game, we lost 3-1. We'd completely disappeared in that game. And I think Celtic do, for this season, have rarely ever played two groups of 45 minutes consistently in the same game well. We've had a lot of good 45 minutes. The second 45 minutes against Kilmarnock to come back from 2-0 down to win 3-2. The second half against Rangers coming from 2-0 down to 2-2. So we've tended to have really good 45 minutes, but not very many good whole lots of 90 minutes all in one game. And even against St Mirren, I think most of us would agree with a good 30 minutes, okay 15 minutes, a terrible 45 minutes, and then a very, very good last 30 minutes in extra time. Yep, Chipper 67, I think you're entirely right that Tierney can go 5 games without a start, then flung in. Chavin Chara starts, then can't make the bench. Rio starts, then disappears for 3 games. Very disruptive, and I do think that's possibly part of the difficulty that players like Chineki, Adamu, and Chavan Chara have had is that they've been in the side, out the side, in the side, out the side. Tierney's had some super goals and super crosses and passes and assists this season. He's also had some pretty rubbish games. I know people don't like Chavan Chara, but I thought he started his Celtic career well against Hearts in the 2-2. Had a header that was brilliantly saved. Set up the goal for Yang. He then scored against Falkirk. He then had a wee bit of a dip in his form. We also sort of switched round. We gave Iheanacho and Maeda a few starts, and Chavan Chara wasn't starting the games. He then scores the penalty against Rangers. He then scores the penalty against Motherwell. He then has a couple of games where he doesn't score goals, and then suddenly he's gone from being the starter 1 week to not even being on the bench a week later. It must be very, very, very difficult for your confidence, very difficult to know where you lie, in that you seem to be in and out of the team, on and off the bench. And anyway. Yes, Dexter. I hadn't read the story in that depth, but it says Dexter saying sad news. BBC are scrapping Football Focus. Was brought up on this after playing for St Mungo's in the morning, then watching the then watching Football Focus over lunch, and then you're going to St Mary's in the afternoon. I was quite often playing in the morning for the school, and then coming back watching Football Focus with sandwiches and soup and stuff like that, and then going out to play for the village team or the Scouts or the Cubs or that kind of thing in the afternoon. So completely know where you're coming from. And it was a kind of central focal point for me of catching up with football news, seeing the players. Obviously, Football Focus focusing on the English game primarily, but it is sad to see it go. I think it's kind of lost its sort of central point over the last 4 or 5 seasons for a variety of reasons. So probably was time for it to go. But it is definitely a sad thing to see it go. So 667, apparently Bruni was in Budapest yesterday watching Ferencváros, starting a few rumours about him and Robbie Keane's staff. But just that's a talk online. Well, as well as Scott Brown, Johnny Hayes was on the same trip to go and watch Ferencváros in Hungarian football. So I'm not quite sure. Johnny Hayes obviously has a team, a role with the academy or the younger players at Celtic. So whether that was just some players catching up with Robbie Keane, obviously Johnny Hayes and Robbie Keane will know each other from international GT. Brown and Keane will know each other from international football, but also that brief spell at Celtic for Keane. So yes, so Dexter is saying, was Martinez at Hampden on Sunday? My understanding was that Roberto Martinez was in the crowd at the weekend. I guess probably as a guest of Sean Maloney. Wouldn't have thought there was any players on. I'm sure there wasn't any players on either side that would be in his World Cup squad for Portugal, and that Paulo Bernardo is the only Portuguese player we've got. I suppose possibly Martinez might have been trying to catch up with Jota. If Martinez is going to carry on being the Portuguese manager rather than coming back to club football, which is what's suggested. So are you, Ken's suggesting that Scott Brown could be coaching the B team and Martin O'Neill in an advisory role? I would be one for one. I would be happy to see Scott Brown being part of Celtic's coaching backroom team. I'm not massively convinced that Scott Brown is cut out to be an actual manager, the one, the main focus of the attention, much like I don't think Sean Maloney is. I think Sean Maloney is a very good coach stroke assistant manager. I'm not convinced that he's got the ability, based on his record at Hibs and Wigan and so on, to be the number one person who is the one who has to take all the pressure and make all the difficult decisions. I think Scott Brown could well be a very, very good head coach, assistant manager type person. Not convinced he's probably cut out to be a manager, being the ultimate in charge person. I think Maloney and Brown both are good tactical brains. I think they're both intelligent players. Good evening to you, Clashman Numpty. Lovely for you to join us. We've had a few wee topics of conversation, whether James Forrest, Iheanacho should start, who the midfield should be, whether we should drop Austin Trusty and play Benjamin Arthur in place of Trusty. Anyway. That's a very good point, Pat McLaughlin. I'm presuming we're talking about the fact that McGregor gave a press conference on Wilfred Nancy's first day and then never, ever, ever, ever gave an interview in the next 5-6 weeks, which I think, given the fact he's the club captain, he should be the one that was coming forward. It shouldn't have been Luke McCown, Anthony Ralston, Benjamin Negrin, Viljami Sinisalo, Kasper Schmeichel. Kasper Schmeichel disappeared from all press interviews and conferences and stuff for those 5 or 6 weeks as well. It should be players like McGregor coming forward as the club captain to be right beside having McGregor and Nancy sitting side by side at press conferences. It would have shown that, at least on the face of it, that the team and the management and the coaching and stuff were all together. The fact that McGregor disappeared for those 5 or 6 weeks, I thought was very, very telling. And I don't think that's terribly professional as the club captain to not be visible and not be supporting the new manager on the pitch and off the pitch. Now, it could well be the two of them didn't get on in terms of a relationship, whatever. Yep, so that's I completely agree. Chipper 67. I thought Callum McGregor was in hiding when Nancy was the head coach manager. He's the captain. He should be the one that's going out every couple of weeks to be the one doing the press conferences, doing the interviews, doing all the PR stuff. And as I say, I think it would have been looked much better for Celtic had there been McGregor and Nancy sitting side by side in the press conference together, answering questions together, talking about the philosophy, talking about the tactics, talking about the difficulties the players were having coming to terms with the change of pace and the change of positions, etc. I think it would have been far better than sending up McCown, Ralston, Negrin, Johnny Kenny, etc., etc. I was just too hot. The room that I do the videos and the live streams has a big window, and so the room gets quite hot during the day if the sun's been out, and was the case here. So I do apologise for having to take my sweatshirt off. It was rather too hot for me. So, Clashman empties. I would stick with Maeda through the middle. Iheanacho, Tierney, Forrest, Hattati, all impact subs as and when required. Yep, I think there's merit in that. I prefer Maeda out on the left for the bulk of the game, and I personally would go with Iheanacho as the starter through the middle and hope that he can play 60, 70 minutes for us, and then hope that then for the last half hour or so, 20 minutes or so, we can then bring on Tierney or Forrest to take over as one of the wingers, put Maeda into the middle, or if Osmond is fit enough, to use him as the sub central striker for the last 20, 30 minutes and leave Maeda out wide on the left. I think Maeda, given the fact that he gives you 100% energy from minute one right through to the last minute of the game, you think about Dyson Maeda, it was his hassling of the goalkeeper and the defenders that got us the first goal. He then hassled the Gogic, the centre back of St Mirren, won the ball off him, and then crossed it for Negrin to score the sixth goal. So didn't do an awful lot of really creative stuff in between, but he scored the first and created the sixth. And he gives you lots and lots of energy. He seems to be committing a lot of energy to Celtic at the moment. It was nice to see him score his first goal since January the 10th. So he'd gone the best part of over 2 months since scoring a goal for Celtic. Triple 67. It depends a bit on your philosophy. And so impact subs are impact subs. So my personal feeling is that the players we're talking about, Saracchi, Iheanacho, and Forrest, their contributions this season, maybe apart from Saracchi, but certainly Iheanacho and Forrest's best contributions for Celtic have been coming on as substitutes. Forrest has really struggled as a starter. Iheanacho struggled as a starter at the start of his Celtic career. Then he obviously missed a lot of games through injury. And I think personally, he played well against Dundee as a late sub. He played well against St Mirren as a late sub. In the league match, he played really well as a late sub in the semi-final game. He played very, very poorly for me in the Dundee United 2-0 defeat at Tannadice a couple of games before that. So, but swings and roundabouts, yes. So, but you also could well be entirely right if you tell Iheanacho and Forrest, go all out for 60 minutes and then we'll take you off and we'll put someone else on in your place. And as long as we don't get any other injuries that supersede that all works out fine. My worry is that if you start those players, you might be committed to having those players playing the whole 90 minutes, which is my worry. Also, bit of a worry regarding Iheanacho having his third hamstring problem of the season if he's played too much and playing too many minutes. So Celtic boys say much the same. Kelechi can't start because he's lost his legs to start and has been impactful coming off the bench. I think that's what I would tend to agree with, but each to their own. So Kieran Allen saying when we win the double, this is the ultimate humiliation of Rangers. So I think that's definitely it would be I think it would be quite an achievement for Celtic, all things considered, with the number of chopping and changing of managers, chopping and changing of players, the number of first choice players out injured or playing with injuries for large parts of the season. For us to come through and get a double would be a miraculous achievement, partly due to how well Maloney and Fotheringham and Manus and O'Neill have done to pull the squad together. Yeah, so Jay Celtic, but I would tend to agree with that as well. Each to their own, though, and everybody's opinion is correct. Everybody's opinion is equally valid and equally valued. But to start Kelechi Iheanacho, expect him to do it all up front on his own, whilst the other team is still fresh, and we only get 5 or 6 out of 10 from him. And that's been my memory of Iheanacho this season, is that he doesn't seem to have the energy, the endurance to start a game when the opposition are nice and fresh. I think he is best when the game opens up a bit in the last 20, 30 minutes of the game. Players are a bit tireder. particularly if we can get some extra pace out wide from Saracchi, from Ralston, Donovan, Chinnecki, Maeda, Yang, etc., etc. I think if we can get the game to be a bit more opened up, which has been the case in quite a few of the games where we've come back late on to win games, I think it's in our favour. So Lauren's saying, what do we want to happen with the other two fixtures this weekend? Only 3 points between Hearts and Hibs and Motherwell for the Eurospot. Hopefully they make a game of it at East Road. So the ideal scenario, of course, would be for Hibs to beat Hearts 2 or 3-0, and for Motherwell to beat Rangers by a goal or two. That helps equalise the goal difference to Hearts, puts us level with Hearts if Hibs do beat them. If Motherwell do beat Rangers, obviously it gives us an advantage over Rangers, does make the goal difference a bit better between us and Rangers, puts more pressure on both of them going into the Rangers-Hearts match that follows on the bank holiday Monday after that. So I think probably if we're talking about what we want in the Rangers-Hearts game, we probably want Rangers and Hearts to draw, because that obviously takes a couple of points off both of them. And as long as we keep on winning our games, that puts them under more and more pressure. And then if things went well for us this weekend and then Hibs and Rangers draw that game on the bank holiday Monday, suddenly Celtic are top of the table by a point or two. Yep. So Mr. Tomboy thinks that Motherwell will give Rangers problems this weekend. I would tend to agree with that. Chipper67 can only see Hearts dropping points, if any, this weekend. Well, can't remember the exact statistic, but it's been very, very few times that Celtic, Rangers and Hearts have all won on the same weekend. It's actually been maybe 3 times or something this season that all 3 of the top 3 have all won on the same weekend, which does suggest, partly because Rangers have been drawing a lot of games this season, Celtic have been winning a lot of games, but also losing a lot of games this season. So Pat McLaughlin saying if Robbie Keane did come in, it would be his management team. I honestly don't actually know who is in his management team, and whether he's had the same management team in Israeli football as he's got in Hungarian football, or whether he's kind of adopted Israeli-based coaches for when he was managing in Israel, and then he adopted Hungarian coaches. I honestly don't know. Haven't really looked actually at this point into Robbie Keane's backroom staff. I think if Robbie Keane did come to Celtic, he would be stupid, in my view, to get rid of people like Fotheringham, McManus, and Maloney, etc. I think those 3 have got a real strong knowledge of Celtic, a really strong knowledge of Scottish football. I think Maloney has very, very good insight into European football as well as British football. So if I was Robbie Keane and he is our choice, I would keep him. I would keep Maloney and Fotheringham and maybe McManus. Very happy if Gavin Strachan goes. Very happy if Stevie Woods goes. I think Stevie Woods probably has been the goalkeeping coach for far too long. I think having the same coach year after year after year after year makes things quite stale. So, Clashman Numpty, most of the squad didn't support the manager because they weren't good enough to play his system. If we're talking about Wilfred Nancy, I would tend to agree that I think technically some of the players weren't up to it, and I think physically a lot of the players weren't up to it. The system that Nancy had requires the centre-backs to have tons and tons and tons of energy. I don't think Ralston or Scales had tons and tons of energy. I don't think McGregor had the energy to track back. Don't think Paolo Bernardo had the energy to try it back. McCowan didn't have the energy to try it back. I think Yang did a great job tracking back. Maeda did a good job tracking back. We created tons of chances under Wilfred Nancy. We just didn't put them in the back of the net. We missed so many chances under him. We defended very poorly, but then at the same time, Kasper Schmeichel had a pretty poor spell over that month as well, letting quite a few goals, such as against Motherwell, some poor defending at corners and high balls against Dundee United, partly due to him, partly due to the centre-backs and the full-backs. And against Rangers, I think he was at fault for 2, if not 3 of the goals against Rangers, at least in part. So, Chipper 67. So, Eric Martel is an interesting player. So there is a video about Eric Martel that I did a couple of days ago. So Eric Martel, from memory off the top of my head, he's a 23-year-old German player playing for Cologne in the Bundesliga. He's got 30 caps for Germany at the under-21 level, scored 3 goals for them. He is primarily a defensive midfielder who can also play at centre-back. He more played at centre-back when he was younger, playing for RB Leipzig. Since he's moved to Austria, Vienna, and then to Cologne, he's been playing primarily as a defensive midfielder. He is a big, strong player, 6'3", can really mix it in midfield, good at tackling, good at blocking, intercepting, good at breaking up play, tends to hold on to the ball well. He's got pretty good pace for breaking out of defence. Good in the air defensively, good in the air and the other box. Doesn't have the highest number of goals or assists in his career, but he is a really interesting player. The story also with Martel is that his contract at Cologne ends at the end of May of 2026, so he's letting his contract run down at Cologne. He wants to leave Cologne. The stories were that in end of last year, end of 2025 and this early 2026, he was a player that Celtic were looking for, and the theory would be that he would be a good player to fit into the Wilfred Nancy 3-4-3 system, in that he was a centre-back who also could play defensive midfield. So he was this sort of hybrid centre-back midfielder, a bit like Nir Beaton had been a few years before for Celtic. So a player quite confident defending, good in the air, good tackling, good blocking, but also happy to come into midfield with the ball at his feet and control the game. As a big, strong player, really quite fast, good energy. And as a player, so reportedly Celtic were looking to possibly sign him in January, given the fact his contract was going to be up in May, June of this year. But I think with Nancy being sacked, that kind of put that one on the back burner. But in essence, he's a player that Celtic have been looking at for the last 6 months, 12 months or so. He was on the radar for West Ham last season, but not this season. Besiktas and Celtic seem to be the head of the queue for getting Martel to be a Celtic player. And I think the theory would be that it's a wee bit similar to Arnie Engels, who was playing for a lower half Bundesliga team at Augsburg. That Engels was looking for a sort of stepping stone to the bigger leagues. So I think Martel might well be happy coming to Celtic if he knew that he was going to start most games, play in Europe as well, and then have 2 or 3 seasons at Celtic and then move to a bigger, stronger, richer league in the longer run. He's an interesting player. And reportedly there are a few. So Besiktas in Turkey is probably at the head of the queue. Celtic, a couple of German clubs, a couple of Italian clubs are looking at him as well. But if we were able to promise him regular first-team football, he might well do what Arnie Engels did and turn down some other deals to come to Celtic. So, Paradise Huddle saying double for the hoops. Well, I would love that to be the case. It's what I have been hoping for weeks and weeks and weeks. I still think it's very much on. I would have Celtic personally as obviously massive favourites now for the Scottish Cup. Can't count our chickens until they're hatched. But we're playing against Scottish Championship side. Whether Dunfermline also going to obviously have a bit of a difficult run-in with being in the playoff area of the Scottish Championship. They could have quite a number of games to play after their league season ends, with the continuation of the playoffs and stuff. And I do personally think that Celtic having the home game against Falkirk, home game against Hearts, home game against Rangers is in our favour. I think going to play at Hibs isn't a bad game for Celtic to play away. The one game I do have my qualms about is the away game against Motherwell. Now, it might be by the time we play Motherwell that their season's over because Hibs have overtaken them and put them out of getting into fourth place. So Saracchi ahead of Tierney for sure has been awful. I think Kieran Tierney's been playing okay for the last few weeks, but I don't think Kieran Tierney's been playing quite so well the last few weeks as he had been in previous games. But as I say, he has scored 5 goals this season. He has made 11 assists, which puts him in the top few in terms of goals scored this season, which is really disappointing. And it puts him in the top 2 or 3 for assists this season. So I think he's basically a good. Yep. So we're talking about Martel. 30 games at German under 21 level is more than decent. As I say, he started off at Red Bull Leipzig. He played at Red Bull Leipzig for a few seasons. Wasn't really breaking into their first team, so he went for a season in Austria with Austria Vienna, and then from them to Cologne. He's been at Cologne for about 3 seasons, and as I say, his contract ends in a couple of months' time at the end of May, and he's very, very keen to move on to a new team. Off the top of my head, Chipper 67, I don't know how many caps Paulo Bernardo has had at under 21 level, but he certainly has carried on playing for under 21 level for Portugal for about 2 or 3 seasons after being 21. So he will have a lot of under 21 caps for Portugal. And so the thought with Eric Martel is what he's looking for is to be a bit more in the shop window, play in Europe, which he probably would never get to do at Cologne, or wouldn't expect to do at Cologne, and then in a couple of years' time, maybe move to a bigger club in a bigger league, and then get himself into the full German, top division, top team. Yes, Paradise. Huddle, you'll never walk alone. I think having 2 good options at left back is really useful. I think also with players coming back from injury, I do think we do actually have more options in midfield, more options in the centre back positions, more options at left back. We have 2 or 3 players who could play as the central striker. We do have players who can play out wide. We have got people who are probably better as starters and people who are better as subs coming off the bench in the wide position. So I do think that O'Neill, for the first time as Celtic manager, does actually have a number of players playing who are playing decently, and has a number of different options in different positions, which kind of wasn't really the case for Wilfred Nancy due to a lot of injuries that Celtic had at that point, and then O'Neill in his first and his second spell has had a lot of injuries to contend with. Anyway, I do personally wonder. I do wonder whether Celtic actually do have someone actually lined up to come in to take over at the end of May, start of June, because it is actually going to be a very, very busy pre-season. Obviously, our season season ends on the 23rd of May. Then we'll have maybe half a dozen, maybe up to 10 players going off to play in the World Cup. The World Cup runs through from early mid-June to early mid-July. The league season in Scotland starts on the 1st of August. So players like Johnston, Trusty, Tierney, etc., who do play in the World Cup for their various different countries, some of them, particularly if the country's been successful, are going to have a couple of weeks after the World Cup finishes in mid-late July to coming back to playing for Celtic in the first game of the season, which is on August the 1st or around about August the 1st. And of course, pretty much no matter where we end in the league, we'll almost definitely have European qualifier games mid-late July, early August to go through. So it's going to be a very, very complicated pre-season. So I think the sooner the better we get a manager in, the better. Chipper 67, from what I've seen of Arthur, would you be looking at a permanent deal? I don't think Benjamin Arthur or Brentford has any intention of letting Benjamin Arthur go away to another club on a permanent deal. I could easily see Celtic and Brentford next season coming to an agreement that Arthur comes back to Celtic on a season-long loan. Much the same way that we had players like Elyounoussi for a couple of years on loan, Fraser Forster for a couple of years on loan, Paddy Roberts on a couple of seasons on loan. But I don't see Brentford giving up Benjamin Arthur. I think they're developing him to be a long-term centre-back at Brentford. So I think they thought, we'll play him for a few games for Brentford this season. We'll send him off on loan the second half of the season, try and get 10, 15 games of first-team football in his legs, then reassess things for next season. I see Benjamin Arthur being a Brentford mainstay centre-back for the next 10 years. So I don't think we'd get the opportunity to sign him permanently, but I think we could easily get this opportunity to get him back on loan again next season, and I'd be quite happy with that. Partly because the fact that Carter Vickers' injury record and fitness record is so poor. So Clashman Numpty saying Pearl Bernardo has been 21 for 8 years. I think we've signed Benjamin Button. Well, I think he's been 21 for about 3 or 4 years, but you're quite right. He's played under 21 level for Portugal for a long, long time. And he's actually played really pretty well for Portugal's on a 21 side. He's actually been a good leader for them. Quite why his Celtic career hasn't really worked out for him, I don't really know. He was very promising when he was on loan to Celtic. He just doesn't seem to have pushed himself forward to be a regular midfielder for Celtic since we signed him. So Clashman Numpty also saying anyone who wanting Arthur in for Trusty doesn't know what they're talking about. Well, personally, I would go for Trusty over Arthur, simply because Trusty is older, experienced, played at the very highest level for America. He's played well for Celtic in Europe. I think he and Scales are now developing a pretty decent partnership. And I think Trusty's also a centre-back who tries to organise the other centre-backs and full-backs and so on. And I don't get the feeling that Arthur is an organiser, and certainly Scales is an organiser on the other side. For a person who is currently Celtic's vice captain. Scales is a very, very quiet player on and off the pitch. Doesn't really show any leadership the way that Alistair Johnson does when he steps up to be the captain or the vice captain last season and the season before. Chipper 67, I do get your point that having three left footers at the back can cause negative backward passing. I do agree. I think it swings and roundabouts. However, I do think that Trusty is a better defender than Arthur. I think he's a better passer than Arthur. He's obviously quite a lot older than Arthur, a lot more experienced than Arthur, and he's played alongside Liam Scales for much longer. I personally would always go for Trusty rather than Benjamin Arthur. But I do completely agree. Having three left-footed players at right centre back, left centre back, and left back is a difficulty, and it's not ideal. And it's something I don't think Celtic should have for next season. Supposedly, Carter Vickers should be back for the start of next season. He is reportedly alongside Jota, ready to start pre-season training in June, July. So, yep. Charlotte's Guy 23. Would I take Christopher Iyer back from Brentford? Yes. I think Christopher Iyer, player with presence, big player, good in the air, good passer, strong player, an intelligent player as well. I think he's obviously played quite a bit on and off for Brentford over 2 or 3 seasons. I think his career at Brentford's kind of hit a wall, so I would happily have Christopher Iyer back. Another player that we might get back potentially is Nicholas Kuhn. Nicholas Kuhn we sold for a lot of money to Como. He's had a pretty awful time at Como. Como are definitely looking to offload him in the summer at a much cut price deal from the 16-17 million that we sold him for. I think we probably could quite happily get him back for 7 or 8 million, much like we did with Jota coming back from Rennes, from a big cut price from what we sold him for. So in general terms, I'm not a big fan of players coming back to the club, but I wouldn't be against Christopher Iyer coming back, wouldn't be against Nicholas Kuhn coming back. Nicholas Kuhn especially would have something really very much to prove. Pat McLaughlin, it doesn't help with Chinecki standing in front of you. It's probably spooking Kieran Tierney. I do agree. I think for Kieran Tierney, it's much easier having Dyson Maeda as the left wide player in front of him, because he knows that Maeda will come back and help him midfield, will even come back to help him in the left back area, that Maeda will do a great job closing down midfielders, closing down fullbacks, keeping fullbacks and midfielders penned back in their own half. Chinecki doesn't have any of those skills. So Paradise Huddle saying would definitely take Kuhn back, a no-brainer. I think if we're looking at our balance, I think the presumption is that Maeda will be leaving Celtic this summer, although there doesn't seem to be quite the same transfer speculation for him like there was last summer or the summer before. But it's probably time for Hatate and Maeda to move on. They've been at Celtic for a long time. Probably time for them to move on. So, Classman Numpty agree that Donovan should be loaned out for next season. I think it really depends a bit on quite where Celtic are in terms of who our other right backs are, because if Johnson's fitness remains a problem, or we don't get a Rojo or someone of that level back to be the other right back, I don't think personally it would be sensible for us to go into a season with Anthony Ralston being our first choice right back, with Donovan away on loan at St Mirren or Kilmarnock or whomever. I think we've been relatively well blessed by having Johnston, Arojo, Donovan and Ralston as 4 options at right back, in that 3 of them are full internationals, and Donovan is a regular under-19, under-21 international. So the question would be whether Donovan's better being the number 2 right back at Celtic, learning from Johnston or Arojo or whomever. I wouldn't be very personally happy to have Ralston as our first choice right back, particularly if there are some doubts regarding Alistair Johnston's fitness for a whole season. Yes, Clashman Numpty, Kuhn and Johnson did have a really good partnership down the right-hand side. I think also the fact that Johnson's been missing for so much this season does actually have had an impact on whoever's been playing as our wide right player. And I can't remember whose comment was earlier on, but I do agree that Kieran Tierney probably feels a lot more secure if he's got Dyes and Maeda in front of him, much happier to bomb forward and get beyond Maeda or link up with Maeda. I think it's a bit more difficult if you've got Chinecki as the player in front of you, because you're not convinced that he's going to be able to track back and cover for you the way that Maeda often does. So Tom Boy saying Ralston's a bomb skid in your opinion. Well, to be fair to Ralston, I thought he had a really good game against St Mirren. I thought he defended basically really pretty well, apart from the cross that he was a bit poor closing down that led to the St Mirren first goal. That was backed up, however, with the fact that he scored a super goal just before half-time. I thought his defending, apart from that one time with the cross coming in from his side for the first goal, I thought he actually defended otherwise pretty fine. But he doesn't fill me with confidence. Whenever a Rojo or Donovan or Johnson's on that side, I've got a lot more confidence that we're going to be secure down that side. I think Ralston up against a really good quality left winger does struggle. Yep. Mr. Tomboy, he did play well against St Mirren. Yep, so Ralston did play well against St Mirren. Chipper. Good. Right. Chipper 67's off to bed. Fair enough. Predicting 3-1 for Saturday. I think that's a perfectly reasonable prediction. I do see Celtic scoring some goals at the weekend. I'm hopeful that our defence holds together. Clashman Numpty, it's a really good question. Who do I want for manager job next season? I'm not massively keen on Robbie Keane, but for different reasons to the ones you're not keen on him. Just I'm not convinced that being a success in Israeli football over a couple of good seasons in Hungarian football is really the stepping stone, having been out of Scottish football for a heck of a long time, to coming in to Celtic at a time that's going to be very, 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 very difficult. As I say, the fact that we've got a World Cup starting so soon after the end of the Scottish season, that World Cup running through to something like the 19th of July, and the fact that 2 weeks after that, Celtic and all the other Scottish clubs will have their first league game of the season, and the fact that Celtic, Rangers, Hearts, whomever, will also have European competition qualifiers in June and early August. And the fact that we've probably got 5 or 6 players leaving, we've got a whole lot of players who are with us on loan, 2 players who are freedom of or who are out of contract players. I think there are so many things to solve that I'm not convinced that a relatively inexperienced manager like Robbie Keane is the answer. For that reason, Jens Bertel Askew, a much more experienced manager, he might be an option. I quite like Roberto Martinez as an option. Experienced, has knowledge of Scotland, knowledge of the highest level of football, relatively successful at Everton, has close links to central Scotland and Glasgow and Lanarkshire through his wife's family and having lived in this area. I think that's a definite interesting one. Another interesting one I've seen over the last week or so is Thomas Frank, the ex-Brentford and Spurs manager. Now, admittedly, he was a big success at Brentford. His time with Spurs in the league was really rather poor. However, he did actually have him in the top 8 in the Champions League group stage, which is decent. And he's in his 50s. He's managed a high level in Danish football, managed a high level in Scottish football. In English football, sorry. And obviously an experienced manager, so might well be the one who's got the experience, the brain power, the organizational skills to mastermind changing the squad as much as it needs changed. I think we also need to look at next season having a replacement for Callum McGregor, either starting most of the games next season or being in line to start all the games the following season. I think, as I say, next season will be James Forrest last season, I'm pretty sure. And I'm quite certain that Callum McGregor's time at Celtic's probably coming to an end. A few people have been speculating that Callum McGregor might be off to play with Brendan Rodgers in Saudi Arabia. I think it's another possibility. Obviously, with McGregor, he probably does have, I think, a couple of seasons left in his legs. Probably playing in Saudi football a bit less intensive than it is in Scotland, which might well be better for his Achilles tendon and his calf muscles, which have been a problem for the last 2 or 3 years. So, Jay, Celtic boy, Spurs too big for Frank, and I reckon Celtic too big for him. Well, to be fair to Thomas Franks, he did manage several seasons with Brentford in the English Premier League. He kept up Brentford in the English Premier League, which I think, for the size of supporters, the size of ground that Brentford's got, their previous squad, I think that was pretty miraculous. He made Brentford a better and better team. His time at Spurs was difficult, remembering that he inherited the side that Ange Postecoglou had created. So part of his difficulties were the squad that he inherited from Ange Postecoglou, who I think all of us would agree is a really decent manager. However, I think the main point of my thoughts is I think Celtic need an experienced manager. I'm not convinced that Robbie Keane, with 3 or 4 years of managing experience in Israel and in Hungary combined, has got the know-how, the intelligence, the experience, the organizational skills to clear out 5 or 6 established players and bring in 5 or 6 established good quality starters, then mix that in with the remaining players, the players like Sinisalo, Tierney, Nygren, Ralston, Trusty, Scales, Sinisalo, etc. I think it's going to be quite a balancing act of keeping the central core of Celtic's team and adapting to some players moving on, Maeda, Hatate, etc. Yep, shout out to Gary that Martin is more suited to international football. That's an entirely good point of view. I think there's a lot of merit in that. As I say, his time as a manager at Wigan was good for the fact that he was managing Wigan. He got them their one and only trophy in their history. He had Everton sort of lower mid table in the English Premier League. He never really got them to the higher levels. He had a super time as the Belgian manager. He's had a super time as the Portuguese manager. Pretty much every competition that Belgium or Portugal has ever been in, whilst he's been the manager, they've got into the final stages and the late stages of several of those. Italy hasn't won anything as the manager of those two countries. So for Clashman and Numpty, Postecoglou would be your hot target. Number one target, Gasperini at Roma. Interesting thing with Gasperini at Roma would be that Roma primarily play a 3-4-3, a variation of what Wilfred Nancy was playing. And so when Roma did beat us quite convincingly in the Europa League, Roma started in a 3-4-3, admittedly a much better defensively organised 3-4-3, because Roma had been playing a 3-4-3 for several seasons. So if we did get the Roma manager, we might well be going back to a 3-4-3, which would mean a few players that we've got would have to learn quickly a new position or be moved on. So I would love to have Postecoglou back, and I would love for Postecoglou to say that he's committing himself to Celtic for 3 years, 5 years, etc. I think having a manager that you know is going to be there for several seasons does allow you to start having proper behind the scenes recruitment, scouting, much better development through the academy, loan system, etc., into the first team. I think the problem, as I've said before, for me, is the fact that we've had so many managers for 2 seasons. Dahlia for a couple of seasons, Rodgers for 2 and a bit seasons, Lennon for 2 seasons, Postecoglou for 2 seasons, Rodgers now again for 2 and a bit seasons. It's really difficult to get that continuity and keep on moving the club forward and forward and forward and forward and forward. And that we've had a lot of restarts, moving from Dahlia to Rodgers, Rodgers to Lennon, Lennon to Postecoglou, Postecoglou to Rodgers, and then Rodgers to O'Neill and Rodgers, O'Neill and Nancy. Classman up to you. The squad won't learn. We need a total rehaul. Well, I think we have got some players. We have got some players in our squad who would happily fit into the 3-4-3 or whatever new system any team wants. I think we have got really adaptable players in people like Alsa Johnston. If Arnie Engel stays, which is less likely, I think he's a player who can develop into different roles. I think Sinisalo is a very, very decent goalkeeper. I think Scales is a tremendously hard trier. I think Tierney is a very adaptable player. I think Tierney would happily learn to play left centre-back, left wing-back, etc. So I do think we've got several players throughout the team who are adaptable and intelligent. But I do agree, we one way or another, we would need a rehaul, an overhaul, whatever, quite major changes. Particularly if we do bring in a coach who has a different system, be it 3-4-3, 4-4-2, 3-5-2, 5-3-2, etc. We've kind of been stuck with 4-3-3 style managers of one sort or another for a long, long time. Admittedly, the Ange Postecoglou 4-3-3 was quite a different set of 4-3-3 than the one that Lennon and Rodgers had used before him or Rodgers used after him. So, Mr. Tomboy and Charlotte's Gary 23 both going for Askew. I think Askew is an interesting one. I think he has a really good brand of football. He obviously got that bedded in at Motherwell extremely well over their pre-season, and that they came out the start of this season all guns blazing, playing a good brand of football, playing from the back, playing with confidence, getting the ball forward, getting the ball wide, getting the ball into the middle. He took a bunch of players, many of whom were free transfers or had come through the Motherwell system, and he turned them into a very, very good team. My only qualm with Askew as a manager is the only trophies he's ever won have been on the Faroe Islands. So he's never won any big trophies at any other clubs prior to coming to Motherwell. He's not won anything at Motherwell. He's not going to win anything at Motherwell. However, I think there's many things in his favour that could make him step up to be a good Celtic manager. Whether Celtic fans would accept him, given the fact that he's not a Celtic man, he's not particularly known to Celtic people from before, apart from this year at Motherwell, those things might not be in his favour. The fact that he's not really got any medals to show for his past career, at least when Postecoglou came from Greek and Japanese and Australian football, he at least could point to all these league titles and cups he'd won in Australia and in Japanese football, and done very well for Australia as an international manager. So So Jay Celtic Boy, Askew is an interesting option. However, Sim again, would he be able to handle being at the helm of a massive club like Celtic? That's always a worry, which is why I have a wee bit more faith in Thomas Frank or Graham Potter or Roberto Martinez coming to be managing Celtic, because they're more experienced managers. All those three have managed in the English Premier League, admittedly. Potter and Martinez and to lesser and Frank at Spurs weren't very successful in that. Yeah, interesting one, Pat McLaughlin. I would not be the least bit surprised if Derek McInnes ends up managing someone else next season, particularly if Hearts don't win the title. I think he's probably moved his career on 2 or 3 levels. Actually, I wouldn't have been the least bit surprised had McInnes taken over at Rangers, had Rangers not had a bit of a renaissance under Danny Rowe. I'm pretty sure Danny Rowe will be Rangers manager at the start of next season. The reports are Rangers are going to have a big overhaul of their squad as well. Obviously, they've released James Tavernier already. Quite a few rumours to say that Butland's also being released by Rangers or sold on by Rangers. Quite a lot of thoughts that players like Chermiti and Fernandez and Raskin will all get sold on for big profits. So quite a lot of suggestions that Rangers will have, again, 4 or 5 players leaving, 4 or 5 new players coming in. But it does look like Rowe will be their manager. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Derek McInnes goes off to manage somewhere in England where he's managed before at the first job that's available. Again, I wouldn't be too surprised if also Askew has his one season at Motherwell and then ends up managing somewhere somewhere else in Europe or back in Scandinavia at an even bigger club. Oops, just a wee second. Yes, Slabber and Cabbage, I presume you're talking about James Tavernier. He's not really my favourite player. I don't particularly like him as a person. Don't like his attitude. Don't like the way he interacts with the journalists, with the fans, with other teams. He does actually have quite a remarkable scoring career for a right back. Don't think he's actually a terribly good right back, but he is good at taking a direct free kick, be it to score or be it to create a goal for somebody else. Pretty decent taking corners too. However, guys in Maeda very much showed the fact that he's a very poor, really pretty poor right back up against anybody who's got skill or pace or both. So I'd be quite happy. I'd be very, very happy if Tavernier ends his 10 years or whatever it is at Rangers with just that one league title from the COVID season. So great to have had you on, Jay Celtic boy. Haven't I did see the Callum McGregor press conference, but I haven't actually watched it. But I'll watch it tomorrow morning whilst I'm having my breakfast. So lovely to have you on, Jay Celtic boy. We generally do live streams every Thursday from 9 till about midnight, so do pop in again next week. I do try and do videos every 2 to 3 days. Slab and Cabbage, I'm afraid it's just pouring a can of Coke. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are alcohol-free days for me. Just Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays I get to have anything to drink alcohol-wise. So just a kind of Coke Zero today. Non-alcohol day. So Gordon Flowers saying it's Friday down under, Krakatini Open. You're quite right. Is on the other side of the world. It is 12 hours from now, so that will be getting on towards lunchtime in Australia or New Zealand or wherever. But anyway, I have to live by Scottish time, so it's no wine or beer or whatever until 7 or 8 tomorrow evening. Good. So great that it's almost beer o'clock time down under. That's great. Midfield three. So Clashman Numpty. If we're talking, if who I personally would pick as the midfield three on Saturday, I would go with Engels, Hatate, and Negrin in front of them. I would go with Yang on the right, Maeda on the left, and Iheanacho through the middle. I'm a bit reluctant to start Iheanacho from the start because of my worries regarding him getting through 60, 70 minutes. In that I do think he's been at his best this season coming off the bench for Celtic rather than as a starter. However, I think if we can be dynamic in midfield and can be dynamic in the fullback position and the wide positions, I think getting the ball into Iheanacho in a scoring position, he's going to put the ball away much more efficiently than Maeda or Chavanchara or Adamu had done. So in turn, I personally wouldn't start Callum McGregor on Saturday, because I don't think his calf muscle and his Achilles tendon are up to playing as a starter. He doesn't. For me, for the last 4 or 5 games since he came back after being out for 2 or 3 games, I think he's looked even worse than he had been before that. So I think the best thing with McGregor would be give him the last 20, 30 minutes of the match. I do feel that had he ended the match, not started the match against St Mirren, I think he actually would have got Celtic's midfield working better in that 20, 30 minutes at the end where we were trying to run the game down. I think he'd kind of I wasn't convinced that he actually started the game very well. And I thought he faded from the game more and more and more as the half went on. And I hardly heard his name in the 15, 20 minutes he was on in the second half. What do I think of Yang on the left, Forrest on the right, and Maeda through the middle? Again, my worry with Forrest starting any games is the 4 or 5 times he has started games this season, he hasn't really got into the game. He's ended up coming off at half time or coming off early in the second half. So he's only scored 1 goal all season. That was against Aberdeen. Up until a few weeks ago, he'd only actually had 1 assist in the whole game, the whole season. So, admittedly, Forrest in the last few weeks has been upping his assist rate. I personally like Dyson Maeda playing down the left-hand side rather than playing centrally. Because I don't think Celtic really play towards Maeda's skills when he is playing centrally. We don't use his pace, we don't use his ability to get in behind defences, and his finishing skills this season have been very, very poor. Except for the fact that Yang has scored 10 goals this season, and Forrest has scored 1 goal this season. And Yang does give the team an awful lot more in terms of helping in midfield, helping the fullback, etc. Yang also has a lot better aerial ability than Forrest as well. Yang nearly scored a second goal around about the 30th minute against St Mirren in the Cup semi-final at the weekend. I'm not saying Yang is a long way from being a finished player, but the fact that Yang is now back into the South Korean World Cup squad, I think is actually quite a sign that his form has improved a lot in the last season or so, because he was very much on the outside of the South Korean squad. And over the course of this season, he's made himself a regular on the bench player for South Korea, which is more than decent. Yang's primary role is to create and score? Well, he has scored. He's Celtic's second top scorer this season, so we can't accuse Yang of not scoring goals if he's the second highest goal scorer for Celtic. I do agree that a winger's job is primarily to attack, score, and create. However, the benefit we've had of Dyson Maeda playing on the left-hand side for all these years is the fact that he does give the team so much more in terms of energy and helping out midfielder, helping out at the left-back zone, being all over the pitch. And Yang, to an extent, has played that style of football ever since Wilfred Nancy came in and asked him to play that sort of role in Nancy's 3-4-3. And one of the arguments against Luis Palma was always the fact that he wasn't very good at tracking back. He wasn't very good at hard work, which is why fans didn't like him and Brendan Rodgers didn't like him. I like Yang as well, Clashman Numpty. He does tend to pass backward and he really takes a man on. But what we also don't know is quite what his manager is asking him to do. Maybe that's what O'Neill wants him to do. Quite why Callum McGregor these days, 90% of his passes are backwards or to the side. When in the Ange Postecoglou's side, McGregor was facing forward and getting the ball forward to Jota, to Abada, to Maeda, to Kyogo, to Giakoumakis, etc., that McGregor was linking up with the fullbacks who were overlapping. From when Rodgers came back 3 seasons ago onwards, McGregor has got more and more defensive, more and more backward thinking, more and more sideways and backwards with his passing. So maybe that's the way that O'Neill wants them to play, is that certain players are their job is to keep possession of the ball rather than trying to quickly counter-attack. I'd much prefer Celtic to quickly counter-attack. Get the ball forward quickly, get the ball out wide quickly, use passes through the defence, over the defence, etc. But we don't seem these days to do that. Another thing we tend to do, it appears that these days, is we try and pass the ball perfectly through the defence rather than we tend to have 5 passes when maybe 2 would do just as well. So, Clashman Numpty, if Callum McGregor was 90% fit, I would have him starting every game. I think personally he's about 50% fit. And that's for that reason I wouldn't be starting him. I would be maximizing his ability to deliver for the team by keeping him on the bench and bringing him on late in the game. I don't think Callum McGregor this season has been the Callum McGregor that we've had for the last 10 years or so. Completely agree. He is the central pivot to the team, which is why I think we should have been developing someone for the last couple of seasons to be another central pivot to the team. I think under Rodgers especially and under O'Neill, we've relied far too much on McGregor. I don't think he's delivering for us the way he has previously. And I think that's down to his fitness levels, his endurance levels, and down to the fact that he's playing with pain every game and having to sort of nurse himself through. And my personal feeling is since the last maybe 2 months, he's not played anywhere near good enough for me. That's why I wouldn't have him in as a starter. But I'm 100% certain that O'Neill will have McGregor as the starter for the next 6 games. But each to their own. I do think that Engels, Hattati, Oxlade-Chamberlain all could do a good job being as the central person in midfield, particularly Engels and Hattati. Much like Rodgers, O'Neill doesn't seem the least bit willing to not play Callum McGregor, and McGregor has been the central player for Celtic ever since Scott Brown left, and I think it's probably time to move on from Callum McGregor as being our starter, at least to see how he settles down over the June July period. Maybe he needs some form of surgery. Maybe he needs some form of intensive therapy for his calf and Achilles tendon. It has been a major problem for him for the last 3 years or so. He's missed time each of the last 3 seasons. He's missed 3 or 4 games or so this season. My feeling is he hasn't come back. Hasn't come back from that most recent injury anywhere good enough. I don't think he's fit enough to be playing at the moment, other than as a short-term sub at the end. There's different. So Alistair Johnston is a future Celtic captain. It really depends on whether Alistair Johnston sees his future ending at Celtic and in Scottish football, whether his ambitions are to move to England, Italy, Germany, France, etc. I got the feeling from Alistair Johnston is that he's a lifelong Celtic fan. His family, lifelong Celtic fans, that he and his family would get up in the middle of the night to watch Celtic games live on television in Canada. He's recently got married. His wife's moved over permanently from America to live with him in Scotland. Some people were suggesting that he is setting up his home permanently in Scotland. If that was the case, remembering he also signed an extended contract. I think it was last season. He signed a 4 or 5 year contract last season. So it does sound like he's maybe committed his future to Celtic rather than looking to move on. So if that was the case, I would certainly have Alistair Johnston as my captain going forwards in the longer term. Good leader, strong personality, very, very eloquent, very, very intelligent, very good in press conferences, and I got the feeling he organises his fellow defenders and leads the team. And I thought he did a fine job when he stepped in to be captain over the last couple of seasons when Carter Vickers or McGregor was injured. Yep. I think of those of Engels, Hattati, and Nygren. I don't think Nygren's cut out for the hurly-burly of midfield battles. However, I think Hattati can mix it, but particularly Engels is a player who can really mix it. He's a strong player. He's very happy to make a tackle. He's quite happy to go in extra hard in a tackle. He's got a good engine in terms of lots of energy. I do agree. I think Hattati might well be a wee bit too lightweight for that role, which is why maybe I would have Hattati and Engels as two deeper lying midfielders together, kind of defending together and going forward together, so that they're a kind of bank of two players. I think at the moment, personally, there's too much focus on Callum McGregor in his deep role. I think there should be maybe two players from midfield coming back to be out balls for the back four or the goalkeeper to release the ball. Far too often it's Callum McGregor, and 9 times out of 10 when McGregor receives that ball from the back four or from the goalie, he's facing the wrong way. He's facing back to the defence so he can't actually see how to open up the team, which then relies on players like Scales or Tierney or Trusty or Donovan or Ralston or Arohu, when Arohu was playing for us, to make that next killer ball to get the ball out wide, because McGregor's facing the wrong way. Yep, Pat McLaughlin. You'd rather bolster up the midfield and have two up front. I think I've always been a big, strong believer in having two players up front, be it as two players side by side or one ahead of the other. I think it's a great combination. A lot of the great teams of my youth had two main central strikers, sometimes the big tall player like Toshak with Keegan, or Sutton and Hartson with Larson, or many other examples. I think having two up front, it does give you a lot more options. And we do have players. We could technically play a 4-4-2. We could play a 4-3. A 4-3-1-2, anything. We've got lots of different options. And I do personally think, given the fact we have got players who can play wide, we have got fullbacks who can push forward, having maybe Engels, Hattati and McGregor, or Engels, Hattati and Oxlade-Chamberlain as three, all good ideas. And then have up front Iheanacho with maybe Maeda, or Iheanacho with Osmond. I think there are lots and lots of different options we've got. To be fair, Clash with Numpty, I never actually watched the Mike Bassett movie. I always kept on meaning to watch it when it was on television, but I never actually got round to it. So not sure whether it's a compliment or not a compliment to compare me to Mike Bassett, but it does get a wee bit confusing sometimes when you're talking about 4-3-3s and 4-4-2s and stuff, to make sure that the number adds up to 10 when you're talking about it. But I would love to see Celtic play possibly even a 3-5-2, pushing our fullbacks up to be wide midfielders. We've got players who can easily do that. We probably, to play a 3-5-2, we probably would need some form of ball playing, happy passing centre back in amongst the ones we've got. The fact that we've got two left-footed centre backs is a bit of a difficulty. Yes, Mr. Tomboy, I'm very much hoping that Alison Johnson and Osmond are on the bench this weekend. I would be surprised if either of them started on Saturday, but I would love to see Alison Johnson coming on for the last 10-15 minutes. I would love to see Callum Osmond coming on for the last 10-15 minutes, partly because that means that Celtic are winning the game and are comfortable. But I also do think that going forward for this season, but particularly next season, that those two players could be very, very important. I think it was always quite surprising that that Osmond never really got a look in under Brendan Rodgers. I thought Osmond was more than decent in the pre-season games, much like Hayato Inamura was more than decent in the pre-season games. And it always surprised me that pretty much as soon as Kelechi Iheanacho became available for Rodgers to play him, Iheanacho was our designated number one striker, despite the fact that Iheanacho didn't come terribly fit, having had a pre-season with Sevilla, but then having a month where he didn't even kick a ball for his team over in Spain. Yes, totally agree with Wyoming CSC. It'd be great to have the option of Osmond's pace, directness coming off the bench. I think Osmond's got good instincts coming off the bench. He scored a lot of goals in the English Premier League under-21 league for Fulham. Fulham wanted him to stay at Fulham and play for them coming off the bench in the English Premier League, but he chose to come to Celtic. I dare say he must have been promised by Brendan Rodgers or by somebody that he was going to be starting for Celtic or playing a lot of games for Celtic. So I right from the very first time I saw Callum Osmond playing in the pre-season friendlies, but also having watched his footage from his Fulham under-21 time, I thought he's a player that would be, in a year or two's time at Celtic, would be really, really good. The fact that he's had a bit of a very much start briefly and then stop for months and months and months season, I think has probably pushed him back by an extra season. But I think he could turn into a Lee Griffiths, Gary Hooper style of player, i.e. scoring 30 goals for us in a season. But I think he needs to have a bit more experience and a bit more first-team games before he is ready to be the number one striker at Celtic. But I can see him in a season or two's time being Celtic's number two, and then developing into Celtic's number one striker. However, I don't see Adamu staying at the club. I don't see Mvuka staying at the club. I don't see Chavanchara staying at the club. Of those ones, I think Chavanchara is the best player, but I think he's been messed about so much by Borussia Mönchengladbach and then the Turkish club, and now by Borussia Mönchengladbach, and then coming to Celtic, then messed about by the Czechia international manager. I think there might also be something about his personality. He doesn't seem to get on very well with teammates, which might be a factor. It certainly was a factor with Borussia Mönchengladbach. Maybe it's a factor with Celtic. I don't know. As I say, I have a lot of admiration for Chavanchara stepping up to take that fourth penalty against Rangers in the cup quarter-final penalty shootout. And I do have a lot of admiration for him stepping up to take that penalty kick against Motherwell when we were 1-1 with them, putting it away to put us 2-1 up, and then assisting Yang in getting the third goal in that game. So I think Chavanchara's contributions have been more than some people are giving him credit for. But I completely agree, he has been disappointing. But I think he's actually contributed more for the team than people are giving him credit for. But that's just my opinion, and as is often the case on this channel, my opinion is the minority opinion, not the majority opinion. But that's going to be my opinion. But I don't see Chavanchara staying at Celtic. I can easily see him going back to playing for one of the big teams in Czechia and being a big success back for one of the teams in Prague or whatever. Sorry, Sligo boy, I must have missed your debate with Jojo Hamilton about life on Earth, etc. Yep, Paul McGuire, we've always got Balikwisha. Again, Balikwisha, very, 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 very disappointing. Quite what's happened with his career, I don't know, because 3 seasons ago, he was very much on the fringes of getting into the Belgian full international squad. He got himself injured. He never seems to have been the same player again after his first injury. He then had 2 or 3 more injuries. He was injured at the start of this season with Royal Antwerp. He missed quite a number of games in the summer leading up in the pre-season, leading up to the start of the season. So, but another player who hasn't, for one reason or another, settled down at all at Celtic. Some people suggesting that Celtic don't quite know what his best position is. Whether he's a bit like Luis Palma, who has gone on to bigger and bigger success in Polish football. He's been one of the central figures, like Luis Palma, in the Lech Poznan team, who are top of the Polish league, playing in a sort of attacking midfielder role, being a player who creates goals, scores goals, links midfield and links the attack, playing a role he very much had never ever played for at Celtic. Nobody even thought to play him there. Some people suggesting that's Balikwisha's best position, but I don't see Balikwisha staying at Celtic. Whether we send him off on loan back to Belgium or somewhere similar to that, I don't know, or whether we just take a big £3 or £4, £5 million loss on him and send him off somewhere else, and take a big transfer deficit hit on him. But I'm not calling for Mikel Onge Balikwisha to remain at the club. Yep, Paul McGuire, you're quite right. The highlight videos of Balikwisha, there were some from one year and there were some from the year before. In that Balikwisha had been on Brendan Rodgers and Celtic's radar for a good 18 months before we signed him. His highlight reels look really, really good. I think those highlight reels must have been based on his good form for Antwerp, etc., prior to his first big injury. Classman up to saying Chavanchara, McGowan, Paulo Bernardo, Ralston, Mvuka, Balikwisha, Adamu, McGregor, Iheanacho, Maeda, Nigrin, Schmeichel, Donovan, all sold or got rid of. I would, of all those ones, I would keep Donovan, I would keep Nigrin, I would keep Ralston, and I would keep McCowan, simply because they're Scottish, and that's terribly useful in terms of UEFA coefficients. And I would not be against McGregor leaving. There are a lot of people suggesting that he is going to go off to Saudi football to be with Brendan Rodgers, get a couple of years of £10 million a year salary. Schmeichel's gone for definite. I can't see Iheanacho staying. Maybe Oxlade-Chamberlain. I'm pretty sure Maeda's on his way out. Hatate's on his way out. Balikwisha's on his way out. And I think the loans for Chavanchara, Adamu, and Mvuka have been disappointing. If all the loans had been as good as the Saracchi and Arojo loans, we would have been in seventh heaven, but those three haven't really worked out as loan players. I think Ralston and McCowan are decent players. Ralston, as he showed on Sunday against St Mirren, is capable of a good game of football. I'm not saying he's anywhere near as good. I think Donovan's a way better fullback than Ralston is, and Donovan's 19, 20 years old. I would not be letting Donovan go. Well, Nygren to Spurs for 25 million. Well, Nygren going to Spurs for 25 million might mean that Nygren ends up in the English Championship. Whether he wants to move from Celtic, where he's pretty much guaranteed to be playing in Champions League or Europa League or Europa Conference League every season, to playing for Spurs in the English Championship. Spurs are actually they're in the relegation zone at the moment. There are 2 or 3 points behind West Ham. There's not many games left in England to go. don't remember exactly what Spurs run in, but somebody was saying that Spurs run in is actually more difficult than some of the other teams around them. Um, so I think Burnley and Wolves are definitely relegated, but yes, we'll see. Clashman Numpty thereby hangs a tale. Thereby hangs a tale. Some players are in it for the money. Some players are in it for the medals. Some players are in it to win things. And there are some players who money is not the only object to things. You think about players like Paul McStay, and this is obviously years ago, but players like James Forrest, Callum McGregor, could easily have left Celtic for much, much bigger wages playing in the English Premier League, but they chose not to go. Particularly Callum McGregor, several times was lined up to go and play in England, and he didn't want to leave Celtic. He wanted to stay at Celtic. My understanding, I can't remember off the top of my head what Nygren's salary is at Celtic, but he's one of Celtic's top 10 players. He's certainly not in as much money as McGregor or Tierney or Carter Vickers, but he's on the same sort of money that Hatate Maeda is, a bit less than Alistair Johnston. Yes, I completely agree. Hatate and Maeda are gone. I think personally that Nygren's going to be at Celtic another season or two. I don't think other teams will be willing to take Nygren on, because I don't think other teams will think that he is an all-around good enough player to play at the next level. That's why I'm not convinced that anybody will buy Nygren in the English Premier League or the German Bundesliga or the Serie A. I don't think, particularly a big rich club like Spurs, maybe Brentford, maybe Bournemouth, maybe Crystal Palace, a team with a smaller fan base, a smaller stadium, etc., etc. I don't see Nygren going to a massive club like Spurs or Man United or whomever else. And as I say, some players do stay at clubs for first team football and for trophies and medals and winning things. Yep, so Sligo Boy is saying, let's look to optimise transfer fees and outgoings when we have money in the bank, broker a better deal, or buy better with better wages than higher board dividend. I think that my personal feeling in terms of attracting players of real quality to Scottish football, it's difficult and potentially going to get more and more difficult to attract players of really high quality, which is why I think Celtic should be much more looking at trying to buy the best players from other teams in Scotland, be it players who are Scottish or players who are overseas players. Elijah Just at Motherwell, Masmonisi at Motherwell, Watson from Kilmarnock, Luke Graham from Dundee, these sorts of players, not saying necessarily those players, but these up-and-coming young players who've had a good season elsewhere. I think we've not been good enough buying players from other Scottish teams over recent years, and I think that's letting us slip back. I know Clashman Numpty was talking about the fact that having your 8 Celtic trained or Scottish trained players in your squad for Europa League and Champions League isn't much use if the player's not much use, but it does actually mean that you have got a bigger squad if you expand it by having some Celtic trained players and some Scottish trained players. And given the fact that Forrest, McGregor and Ralston are 3 of our Celtic trained players, and Tierney obviously, we are running out of players who are Celtic trained, who are good enough to be Celtic players. Anyway, I think, as I've said before, I think Ralston's a decent player. I think he's a good backup player. He's happy to be at Celtic. He's happy to be at Celtic, even if he's the third choice or even the fourth choice right back. And he generally comes in and plays a decent game. He had his worst games this season were when he was asked to play at right centre back by Wilfred Nancy. I don't think that was anywhere near his right position. And I do think Ralston is a relatively limited player. However, as I said, he had a super game, I thought, against St Mirren at the weekend. Scored a great goal, defended for the most part pretty well. So anyway, you do need dependable players like Scales and Ralston who are happy to be at the club, happy to be backup players, etc. Scales, admittedly, for the last season or two has been, for the most part, a starter. My personal feeling is that Scales probably should be Celtic's third choice centre back, not one of the first two first choice centre backs. So I'd be all for Celtic signing a really good quality right-sided centre back to partner Carter Vickers and to partner Trusting, to partner Scales, and having four dependable, experienced centre backs, two on the left, two on the right, and that way you're covering for injuries, suspensions, much better than we have been this season, where we've really struggled because we've only had we've not really had an experienced right-sided centre back all season after Carter Vickers got injured. Murray and Arthur, both decent young players, but they're massively lacking experience at the highest level. Anyway. Oh dear. Anyway. So, one or two interesting comments in the comment section, one or two interesting jokes as well. Won't put those up on the screen. So I think just in the last 5-10 minutes of the live stream, we're getting towards 12:30. Yep. Wyoming CSC, I agree with you up to a point there. I think Ralston has been a decent player for us. He's been happy to be at Celtic for a long time. He's been happy to be second or third choice. He's been happy there to be with Johnston, Arojo, Donovan all ahead of him. And more often than not, he comes off the bench and does a decent game coming off the bench, or comes in to start if someone's injured or suspended or whatever. And with Arojo, Donovan and Johnson, that does mean that Ralston's had more games this season than probably was ideal. And he's had some poor games and some good games and some average game. Yep. That's Nygren is a bit of a conundrum in that he has scored 20 goals. He's got about 10, 11 assists as well. Anyway, yeah, so Nygren is a bit of a conundrum in that he isn't the fastest player. He is quite one-footed with his left foot. He's decent with his right foot, but doesn't really use his right foot if he can't help it. He's not the best dribbler. He's a pretty decent passer. Good from a dead ball situation, which I don't think we use him enough for. And when we do get him a chance in front of goals, he is actually pretty dependable at putting it in. But for that reason, I'm not convinced that any big club's going to come in for Nygren this summer. I think Nygren's probably going to be at Celtic for a couple of seasons more after this season. Yep. Nygren's general play isn't that great. I think possibly he could be a player as he gets a wee bit older, which he might return more into a more conventional central midfield role. The thing I think a lot of people are not giving him credit for was prior to coming to Celtic, he wasn't really a conventional central midfielder. He was much more of a second striker, attacking midfielder, sometimes playing out wide, sometimes, as I say, when he was playing out wide, he primarily was more as an attacking midfielder role, roving from side to side rather than being a wide player that tried to beat people on the outside or the inside. Anyway, hail to you, Clashband Numpty. Yep, and as Cheryl, it's Gary saying, without Nygren's goals, goodness knows where we'd be this season, and to a lesser extent, without Yang's goals, goodness knows where we'd be this season. For two fairly limited players to be our number one and number two goal scorer, with Kieran Tierney a few slots down from that. Massive drop off in the number of goals from Maeda last season to this season, 33 to 9. McGregor's gone from 10 goals last season to 2 or 3 this season. So we have been missing a lot of goals over the season. So just in the last 5 minutes or so, actually, Pat McLaughlin, really good point. He's saying if we'd been more stable on and off the pitch and had better quality around him, who knows how many goals he'd have. That's a really good point of view, actually, is that maybe a wee bit similar to Callum McGregor. If we'd given him better chances, they would have put more of them away. I think it's entirely reasonable. In the Wilfred Nancy era, when we did create a lot of chances, it was primarily Kenny and Maeda who were missing them. To an extent, it was also Yang and Tierney and Nygren, but a lot of the chances we created in the Nancy era were for Maeda and Kenny primarily. But much like everything else, quite often for a player like Nygren, who isn't the one who mixes things up in midfield as much or tackles as much, etc., you do need players behind him who are going to back him up and do some of the midfield work that ordinarily Nygren would have done. So I do completely agree with you what you're saying there. That if we had a bit more quality around him and focused getting in the ball into him and Iheanacho more in front of the goals, maybe we would actually have got a lot more goals from Nygren and a lot more goals from Iheanacho as well. So Clashman Numpty saying that just read our Herald report where McGregor says he's had an issue, but it's 100% now and he's ready to go. Well, I would be really massively surprised if he had an issue that kept him out a few games, and then the next few games when he has played, he's been looking like he's half fit. I'd be massively surprised if miraculously over 3 or 4 days of physio and rehab and stuff that he's completely cured of his problem. But if McGregor's 100% fit, I'm very happy for him to be in the side. If he's 50, 60% fit, which is how he strikes me at the moment, I'm not happy for him to be starting in the side. As good as a player as he has been for Celtic is the fact he is the captain, all these other factors. For me, if he's not 90% fit or better, he really shouldn't be starting any games for Celtic. But if the Herald is saying that McGregor's now 100%, all I'm saying. I apologise, Clashman Numpty. I didn't mean to shoot the messenger. All I'm really saying, if you look at the fact that he's had a problem in that area for about 3 or 4 years, which has caused him to miss games in the last 3 seasons. If it gets miraculously better so quickly, it'd be really a big surprise. And in terms of understanding anatomy and sports medicine and orthopedics and all these other things, physiotherapy, it's not really that credible that you make that much. You can make that much improvement in a short period of time. Thank you, Slabber and Cabbage, for your positive feedback. Yep. Whamming CSE, would you take? I would take O'Reilly back. I would take Nicholas Kuhn back. As I've said before, I'm not the biggest fan of taking players back. I think players coming back to the club generally works better than managers coming back to the club. O'Reilly's not had a terribly happy time away from Celtic. Nicholas Kuhn's not had a happy time away from Celtic. Jota didn't have a happy time away from Celtic. Good thing with all of those players is they're still all in their mid-20s or slightly above their mid-20s. So I'd happily take all of them back. Kyogo is now over 30. He's had a really miserable, 15, 16 months since leaving Celtic. I wouldn't take Kyogo back, and I doubt that Kyogo would want to come back. I think Kyogo will be going back to Japan this summer. Just looking up to see what amount O'Reilly. He was at Brighton, obviously, and he went off on loan to Marseille, but I don't think it was working for him across in Marseille either. So Matt O'Reilly was at Brighton, played 29 games for them last season, 3 goals, 3 assists, on loan at Marseille, 25 games, 1 goal, 6 assists, so quite considerably down on the kind of stats he had at Celtic, where he was 27 goals and 35 assists. So I don't think he'll be staying at Marseille past the end of this season. The 1 goal and 6 assists isn't really enough to get you a first team place. So kind of what Sligo Boy's saying as well. Was at Brighton, off to Olympique Marseille, not having the happiest time at Marseille, had injury problems again, which of course he had at Brighton as well. Again, if O'Reilly was available at a 8, 9, 10 million, whatever, much like the suggestion is that Nicholas Kuhn might be available for that sort of price, I would very happily have him back. And someone was asking about Christopher Ajer again. I would happily have Christopher Ajer back, still a young enough player, quite a dominant player, right-sided centre-back, he also did play a bit for us at right-back as well. So, yep. Can't remember what team against. So on his Brighton debut, he had pretty pretty horrible major injury that kept him out for months and months and months, and did an operation. And he was injured within a few minutes of the game starting. I think it was in a League Cup match or a Caribou Cup match. So I can't remember who it was against, but it was against one of the sort of lower division teams, and it did keep him out for several months, and it did kind of destroy his Brighton career. He never really got back into the Brighton team last season to further his career, which is why they offloaded him to Marseille. Anyway, we're now approaching 12:30 on Friday morning, midnight morning. Quite right, Sligo boy. The door is ajar for Christopher Ayer. You're quite right. Riley McGree, I think, went to Middlesbrough. Whether he stayed at Middlesbrough, I can't remember, but he looked a decent player, Riley McGree. But I think his career at Middlesbrough went nowhere in particular. Yep, so Riley McGree still at Middlesbrough. 124 games, 20 goals, 14 assists. So a decent record at Middlesbrough. Of course, Middlesbrough still in the English Championship. And so quite right, Gordon Flowers. It's been Friday for you for quite a long time. So yes, Wyoming CSE. There were several players that chose to go to play in the English Championship that could have come to play for us. So Strelic was one. Matthias Kiesgarden went to Norwich. There were a few others that chose to go to the English Championship, as opposed to the coming to Scotland or going to a comparable league. Thing to remember is, in terms of things like TV money, sponsorship money, prize money, the English Championship is actually way up there in terms of the leagues. English Championship's actually the 7th best league in terms of all the various different ratings for things like prize money, player contracts, TV money, quality of players, quality of opposition. So the English Championship is actually a very strong league, and a lot of players are choosing to go to the English Championship rather than coming to play in Scotland or Belgium or Portugal or whatever. Yep. Kind of what Gordon Flowers is saying there, that Championship is a tough league. I think it is a tough league, and as I said, that it's things like its sponsorship money, its TV money, player contract levels, the quality of players, the number of players who are also international players, etc., etc. The English Championship is actually the number 7 league in the world. The Scottish League is down at number 29. So there's a massive gap actually now in terms of all those things that stats people use to rate leagues for their strength and their quality, etc. between the number 1, which is obviously the English Premier League, team leagues like Serie A, Ligue 1, La Liga, Bundesliga after that, and then English Championship actually well above many other European leagues at number 7. Yes. So so Sligo Boy is saying that Ryan Porteous was on at £37,000 a week at Watford. Not sure. I'd be surprised if he was on £37,000 a week playing Major League Soccer, but because generally their wage structure isn't as high as it is in English Championship. But the point you're making, I think, is really very strong. That the fact that the English Championship pays very high amounts of money in terms of weekly salary, because It's actually got a gigantic big TV contract. It's got big sponsorship contracts. It's got big prize contracts through the league sponsorship that they've got, which does allow all the players in that, all the clubs in that group to does allow all those teams to offer bigger and bigger wages and contracts and salaries and stuff. The fact that Scotland's got such a small TV contract, small prize money, small sponsorship for the league, it's it's difficult. It's difficult for Celtic to keep up with those sorts of leagues, and potentially it's going to get bigger and bigger and wider. You're quite right, Clashman Numpty. If Spurs did get relegated, they would get an absolutely gigantic big parachute payment. I'm pretty 100% certain that if Spurs did get relegated this season, which at the moment they are in the relegation spot, they have got enough games, about 5, I think it is, to get out of the relegation spot. But they're a team with not an awful lot of confidence on the pitch. They've changed their manager yet again. Not quite sure who their manager is now because they've sacked Igor Tudor. They've had quite a number of different changes of manager. Postecoglou, then Frank, and then Tudor, etc. They do seem to be a team very low in their confidence and very low in the luck recently. So would not be the least bit surprised to see Spurs relegated. The question would then be whether that's right. Sorry, De Zerbi. He's now quite right. Sorry, yes, they sacked Tudor and they've now got De Zerbi in his place now. De Zerbi, obviously a manager with a lot of previous success. And I'm 100% certain if they did get relegated, which is a strong chance, they would bounce straight back up again. The question is whether Nygren would want to leave Celtic with an expectation that he would be playing some form of European football next season for Celtic, also being a Celtic starter for 75% or more of the games next season to go and be a player at Spurs. I'm not convinced that Spurs would want him, because sometimes getting yourself out of the English Championship, you do need a bit of steel and a bit of combativity and strength in midfield, and that's not really Nygren's strength. Yes, Spurs are going down. I think they did. I think they did. I think they were actually quite unfortunate in the way that they treated Ange Postecoglou. He did win. Now, admittedly, they were down the bottom of the league last season under Postecoglou, but he did win the Europa League for them, which is really quite an achievement. You could well be right, Clashman Numpty. It could be that Nygren and Alsa Johnson all go off and play for Spurs in the English Championship. My feeling is those two, Johnston and Nygren, would stay at Celtic rather than go and play in the English Championship. I think Engels is destined to go off to play in Italy or play in Germany. Nottingham Forest reportedly want him again this transfer window. Nottingham Forest, I think, are pretty much safe to stay up in the English Premier League for another season. So that would be a very much a positive move for Arne Engels. I don't think Arne Engels is going to be at the club past this summer. And nor do I think Hatate and Maeda will be at the club past this summer. And unfortunately, I don't think any of the players we've had on loan this season will be coming back as permanent players. So I don't think, unfortunately, that Saracchi or Arojo are coming back. But I would love for Saracchi and Arojo to be back next season as permanent players for 2 or 3 or 4 years. Pat McLaughlin, I was only suggest the one of the rumoured clubs for Alistair Johnston has been Spurs. One of the clubs that was rumoured for Alistair Johnston was Everton. Again, I think with Alistair Johnston having missed about 90% of the season, I would be surprised if any team would want to buy him this summer, simply because he's missed 90% of the 25-26 season. In theory, they're all replaceable. You've got a lot more faith in the ability of the Scottish League to attract players of the quality of Johnston, Negrin, and Engels. I've not got so much faith. The fact that the Scottish League in all the ratings of world leagues is going down and down and down and down and down. The fact that we've dropped down the UEFA coefficient leagues to the point where we're now got fewer teams in European competitions now than 2 or 3 years ago. We're in the earlier and earlier rounds of all the European competitions. I don't see the Scottish League system, the Scottish Premiership, as being nearly as attractive this year as it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And the next 2 or 3 years, Scottish football teams have to do really, really well to regain the levels of UEFA coefficients for the Scottish Premiership that we've had the last 3 or 4 seasons. So I think the Scottish League system is in a bit of a doldrums, and it's going to take some very good recruitment, very good transfer signings, and some good quality on and off the pitch for that to turn around. Well, Classman Numpty, with the greatest respect, the system that Celtic's had for the last 14 years has given itself 13 Scottish Premiership titles and numerous cups and League Cups and Scottish Cups over that time. So in terms of domestic football, Celtic couldn't have done terribly much better than they have over the last 14, 15 years, when this has been Celtic's business model for the last 15 years, 20 years, 25 years has been buy players, develop them and sell them on, etc. And over that time, we have done a good job of winning the league pretty much every season for the last 14 years, bar one. And over those 14 seasons, we've tended to add on, in most of the season, not all the seasons, 1 or 2 cups. Rodgers won several trebles, Lennon won some trebles, Postecoglou won 5 out of the 6 trophies that his teams were in for. Rodgers won a double in his first season, a double in his second season. Celtic could well even win a double again this season, despite everything that's been going on. So, we may well be agreeing on the same points. That's one of my points, is the fact that winning the Scottish League doesn't get you an awful lot of money. Winning the Scottish League doesn't get you much in the way of TV money, doesn't get you much in the way of prize money, doesn't get you much in the way of sponsorship money from big multinational companies that will give you gigantic big sponsorship deals like the Emirates Airlines or Chevrolet or Chrysler or whatever. Anyway. And I don't think, unfortunately, for as long as Celtic are a team in Scotland, that the Scottish Premier League or the Scottish League system is ever going to be a league that gets you big TV money, big prize money, big league sponsorship money, etc., etc. So And my personal feeling is that we're going to get, for all those reasons, we're going to get further and further and further behind the really big leagues, the big 5 leagues in Europe, and the gap between us and Portugal, Belgium, Holland, Turkey, Greece is going to get bigger and bigger as well. Because there's a lot more money in football in those countries than there is in Scotland. Anyway, I think it's now gone midnight. It's approaching 20 to 1 in the morning. Be interesting just in the last few minutes to see what people's predictions are for the game on Saturday against Falkirk. I'm going to go for a 3-0 win for Celtic on Saturday. Pat McLaughlin, I would, if there was some way of improving the number of Scottish players in the team, but in any team, but also improving the quality of Scottish footballers in general, I'm all for various different experiments to try and get more and more Scottish players in teams, making a better pathway for the young Scottish players who are playing in the academies at Rangers, Hearts, Celtic, Aberdeen, etc., for them to get into the teams. All for it, all for those sorts of things. I think there's lots of different things. And I'm all for experimenting to get Scottish football better and better, because I think if the stronger Scottish football is in general, the stronger Celtic have to be the best team in Scotland, and I think that'll drive things forward. But I think also having genuine chances for young Scottish players and young academy players to get themselves into the team for Celtic or Rangers or Hearts or Aberdeen or whomever, I think that's also would help boost Scottish football. Yes, so Clash by Numpty 4-1 for Celtic on Saturday. That would be even better than 3-0. Because I do want to see Celtic scoring goals again. We've had far too many 1-0s and 2-1s, far too many scrambled games. I would love for Celtic to have a 4-0. We've had a couple of 4-0s this season. One of the games against Dundee United was a 4-0. I think we beat Falkirk 4-1 in the League Cup right at the start of the season. I would love for us to have a convincing win. Yes, Tomboy, if we won convincingly on Saturday, that would really put the pressure on all the others. I do agree. I think Celtic actually do have an advantage this weekend and next weekend. As long as we win against Falkirk and win against Hibs, I think it's going to pile more and more and more pressure on Rangers and Hearts to keep up with Celtic, because depending how the results go on Saturday and Sunday this weekend, Celtic could even be top of the table by the end of Sunday. If Rangers drew or lose, and if Hibs beat Hearts, Celtic could be top of the table with a good win against Falkirk and a wee win for Hibs over Hearts. Could put us top of the table, or just about on goal difference top of the table. Anyway, Pat McLaughlin earlier on was predicting wins for Celtic. So lots of positivity. So I think what we'll do now, it's getting on for 1:45 in the morning on Friday, so we'll call it a day. It's been absolutely wonderful having so many people on the live stream. The numbers in the live stream have been up in the 20s the whole way through, which has been very, very encouraging. It's when I started doing these live streams last summer, I was expecting a few people to be on, and but I am absolutely blown away with the high quality of comments, the great debates that we've had, great discussions, the sharing of knowledge, sharing of opinions. And thank you very much to everybody who's been with the live stream from the start, the Pat McLaughlins, the Clashman Numpties, Sligo Boy, Slabbering Cabbage, Chipper67, many others. If I've forgotten your name, I do apologise. So we will call it an evening. nice way to finish it. Slabber and Cabbage. If we attack and use our players and their full potential, we'll win our next 5 games 3-0 to Celtic. Couldn't agree more. I think those are very important points. We've got to attack. We've got to use our players to the best of their ability. We've got to be sensible with who we start, who we keep on the bench, who we bring off at what point, who we throw on at what point. I think we need to be a bit more tactically aware. But the most important thing, as you're saying, Slabber and Cabbage, is we've got to get on the attack. We've got to dominate the other team. And then having dominated and got up in the game is not let them back into it. So I think it's a really great way to end the live stream. All things going to plan. We'll have another live stream next Thursday evening at 9 o'clock. I'll send out a wee invitation promotional thing for that on the Wednesday. And so until next Thursday's live stream, goodbye. Good luck, Celtic, in beating Falkirk on Saturday and getting to the top of the table, maybe. And hail, hail.